Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let me tell you a story.
James had attended hundreds of high-profile events throughout his career. Investor galas, corporate award ceremonies, fundraising dinners, product launches. Most of them blended together after a while. The same expensive suits, the same practiced smiles, the same conversations about money, influence, and opportunity. Tonight was supposed to be no different. The charity gala occupied the grand ballroom of one of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. City leaders, business executives, philanthropists, and celebrities filled the room. James stood near one of the tables, holding a glass in his hand, while listening to a conversation he barely cared about. A fellow executive beside him was discussing market projections. Another was talking about a recent acquisition. Normally, James would have joined in. Normally, he would have been interested. For some reason, he wasn't. His attention kept drifting toward the stage. The entire evening revolved around one mystery: an anonymous donor. For nearly a decade, someone had quietly funded scholarship programs across New York. Thousands of students had benefited. Countless families had been helped. Yet nobody knew who was responsible. Speculation had dominated conversations all evening. It has to be a billionaire. No question. I heard it's a hedge fund manager. No. Someone told me it's a celebrity. James had heard every theory. None of them seemed particularly interesting. People with money donated large sums every day. That wasn't unusual. Still, the excitement inside the ballroom continued building. The event host returned to the stage. The room gradually settled. Conversations softened. Heads turned forward. The host smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor a person whose generosity has changed thousands of lives across New York City. Applause filled the room. James politely joined in. The host continued. For years, this individual requested complete anonymity. Another round of applause. But tonight, after much encouragement from the students, families, and communities impacted by their work, they have agreed to step forward. The audience reacted immediately. People sat straighter. Several guests exchanged excited looks. James took a sip from his glass. The host paused, building anticipation. Before we reveal their identity, we'd like to share a few stories. The giant screen behind the stage illuminated. A short video began playing. Images of students appeared. Graduation ceremonies, college campuses, families celebrating milestones, people overcoming difficult circumstances. The room watched attentively. James watched too. At first, it felt like every other charity presentation. A few success stories, a few emotional moments, nothing unexpected, until one sentence caught his attention. A young woman's voice echoed through the ballroom. I wouldn't have made it without her. James frowned slightly. Her? The video continued. Another student appeared. My future exists because she believed in me. Again. She. James lowered his glass. The screen transitioned to another testimonial. A young man smiled through tears. She gave me hope when I had almost none left. The room grew noticeably quieter. Something about the repeated references felt unusual. Whoever this donor was, people weren't talking about her money. They were talking about her, the person, the impact, the kindness, the belief she gave them. James found himself paying closer attention. The final testimonial ended. The ballroom erupted into applause. The host returned to center stage. By now, anticipation had reached its peak. Everyone wanted an answer. Everyone wanted to know who this woman was. The host smiled. I think it's finally time. Laughter spread through the audience. Several guests leaned forward. Phones appeared. People prepared to record the moment. James glanced toward the screen, completely unaware that the next few seconds would shake him more than any business loss ever had. The host took a slow breath, then spoke. Ladies and gentlemen. A pause. Please join me in honoring the woman behind this extraordinary mission. The screen went dark. For one brief second, the entire ballroom became silent. No movement, no conversation, no sound. The photograph appeared. James stopped breathing. His hand tightened around the glass. For a moment he genuinely thought he was mistaken. The face on the screen couldn't be hers. It made no sense. 10 years had passed. 10 years. Yet there she was, Sophia. The woman he once planned to marry. The woman he had loved. The woman he had walked away from. The woman he convinced himself he could live without. Sophia's smile filled the massive screen. The audience erupted. Applause thundered across the ballroom. Several people rose to their feet immediately. Others followed. Within seconds, nearly the entire room was standing. James remained frozen. His eyes never left the screen. 1,000 memories crashed into him at once. Rain falling outside a small coffee shop. Late-night conversations. Neighborhood gatherings. Shared dreams. Laughter. Promises. The painful night. He ended everything. His chest tightened. For years he had assumed Sophia moved on and built a quiet life somewhere. For years he believed their story had simply become part of the past. Yet here she was, standing at the center of one of the most important events in New York, receiving admiration from people who didn't even know her personally. Not because she was famous, not because she was wealthy, not because she owned a company. The applause continued. James looked around the room. Everywhere he turned, people were smiling, inspired, moved, respectful. Many of the same people who spent their lives chasing status were now honoring a woman who had earned something far more difficult to obtain: genuine gratitude. James swallowed hard, because at that moment, one thought hit him harder than anything else. 10 years ago, he refused to marry Sophia because she didn't have money. Tonight, she had become the most respected person in the room, and the evening was only beginning. The applause continued long after Sophia's photograph appeared on the screen. Some guests exchanged surprised looks. Others nodded as though everything suddenly made sense. James couldn't move. He stood among hundreds of people, yet for the first time all evening, he felt completely alone. The host waited patiently for the applause to settle. When the room finally quieted, she smiled warmly. Before Sophia joins us on stage, there is someone who insisted on speaking tonight. The giant screen shifted. A young man appeared from the side of the stage. He looked nervous. Not the kind of nervousness people experience before giving a business presentation. This was different. His hands trembled slightly as he approached the microphone. The audience immediately gave him their attention. The host stepped aside. The young man looked out across the ballroom. For a moment he simply stood there, gathering himself, trying not to become emotional. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "My name is Marcus." He paused. "I wasn't supposed to be here tonight." A few people smiled politely. They assumed it was modesty. It wasn't. Marcus took a slow breath. "I mean that literally." The room grew quiet. "When I was 16 years old, I was sleeping in shelters." The smiles disappeared. James felt himself straighten slightly. Marcus continued. "My mother worked hard. Harder than anybody I've ever known." His voice cracked. "Some nights we slept in our car. Some nights we slept wherever we could find space." The ballroom became silent. No phones. No whispers. Nothing. Just the tension. Marcus looked down briefly before continuing. "There were days I stopped believing my life would ever get better." Several guests lowered their eyes. Others listened without moving. Marcus wasn't telling a polished success story. He was reliving painful memories, and everyone could feel it. "I was angry." He laughed softly, not because it was funny, because it was true. "I was angry at everything." Another pause. School felt pointless. His eyes glistened. College felt impossible. James noticed several people reaching for tissues. Marcus continued. "One day, a counselor told me about a scholarship program." He smiled. "A program started by someone I'd never met." The giant screen displayed photographs, students, graduation ceremonies, community events, scholarship recipients. Marcus pointed toward the screen. That program changed everything. His voice grew stronger. For the first time, somebody looked at my situation and saw a possibility instead of problems. A murmur of agreement moved through parts of the audience. Marcus continued. The scholarship paid for more than tuition. He shook his head. It gave me confidence. His eyes searched the room. It gave me hope. The room remained completely focused on him. Nobody wanted to miss a word. James felt his chest tighten. Because this wasn't a story about money. It was a story about opportunity. About someone believing in another human being. Marcus looked toward the side of the stage where Sophia waited. A smile appeared. The kind of smile people reserve for someone who changed their life. You know what's funny? He laughed softly. Most people think success starts when someone gives you money. He shook his head. That's not true. The audience listened closely. Success starts when someone gives you a reason not to quit. For a second, nobody moved. The sentence landed heavily throughout the ballroom. Marcus continued. Years ago, Sophia told me something I'll never forget. His voice became quieter. I was ready to give up. He swallowed, and she looked at me and said, Your current situation isn't your final destination. Several audience members wiped away tears. Marcus smiled. I carried those words with me every single day. The giant screen displayed photographs of college graduations, students receiving degrees, families celebrating, lives changing. Marcus turned toward the audience. Today, I'm a civil engineer. Applause erupted. He smiled. Not because I'm special. More applause. Because somebody refused to let me believe I was hopeless. The applause grew louder. James glanced around the room. People weren't applauding achievement. They were applauding compassion. Marcus raised a hand. The applause gradually settled. Then came the moment nobody expected. Marcus looked directly toward Sophia. His voice softened. If Sophia hadn't helped me, he stopped speaking, trying to control his emotions. The room waited. When he finally continued, his voice barely rose above a whisper. If Sophia hadn't helped me, I'd probably be homeless today. Silence. Absolute silence. Nobody reached for a drink. Nobody checked their phone. Nobody spoke. For several long seconds, the room simply sat with those words. A young man who nearly lost everything. A woman who refused to let him fall. James felt something shift inside him, because Marcus wasn't the only one. The screen suddenly displayed hundreds of photographs. Students, families, graduates, teachers, community leaders. Smiling faces filled every corner of the screen. The host stepped forward. There are thousands of stories like Marcus's. Thousands. The number echoed through James's mind. Thousands. Not customers, not investors, not shareholders. Lives. Actual lives. Changed. Because one woman decided to care. The audience rose to its feet once again. This time the applause felt different, stronger, more emotional, more personal. James slowly looked back at Sophia's image on the screen. 10 years earlier, he had measured her value by what she lacked. Tonight, he was surrounded by evidence of what she had given, and deep down he already knew something painful. The woman he once thought wasn't enough had become the kind of person money could never create. The evening wasn't revealing who Sophia was. It was revealing how wrong James had been. The woman James once refused to marry because she was poor had just become the most respected person in the room. Not the richest, not the most famous, not the most powerful, the most respected. And that realization hit harder than any business failure he had ever experienced. Because 10 years earlier, James believed he was making the smart decision. The logical decision. The practical decision. He convinced himself that love wasn't enough. He convinced himself that two people from completely different worlds couldn't build a future together. Most importantly, he convinced himself that walking away from Sophia was necessary. Standing inside that ballroom, surrounded by applause meant for the woman he once loved, James finally came face to face with a question he had spent years avoiding. What if the biggest mistake of his life wasn't a business decision? What if it was personal? What if success had blinded him to something far more valuable? And what if he realized it 10 years too late? Before we continue, welcome back to Mr. George's Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. And if you've ever enjoyed one of our stories, take a second to like this video and leave a comment below. Those simple actions help more people discover these life-changing lessons. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been judged because of money? Maybe someone looked down on you because of where you lived. Maybe someone assumed you weren't important because of your job. Maybe someone treated you differently because your bank account wasn't as large as theirs. Or perhaps you've watched someone else go through that experience. If you have, you're not alone. Every day, people are evaluated based on numbers, income, property, status, job titles, material possessions. Society often teaches us to admire visible success, the expensive car, the luxury apartment, the impressive position, the growing company, the public recognition. There is nothing wrong with achievement. There is nothing wrong with financial success. There is nothing wrong with building wealth. The problem begins when money becomes the only measurement that matters, because some of the wealthiest people in the world are deeply unhappy, and some of the most fulfilled people have very little. The truth is that money can purchase comfort. It can purchase convenience. It can create opportunities. But there are certain things money cannot buy: trust, character, purpose, loyalty, love, gratitude, respect. Those things must be earned. James spent years building a company, years building a reputation, years building a fortune. By almost every traditional standard, he was successful. People admired him. Business magazines featured him. Investors trusted him. His company continued growing. From the outside, his life looked perfect. Yet there was something nobody could see. A quiet emptiness that appeared during the moments when everything became still. Late nights inside his luxury apartment. Business trips to cities he barely had time to enjoy. Celebrations that somehow felt incomplete. Achievements that provided satisfaction for a few days before another goal appeared. He rarely talked about it. Most people never noticed. Success can be very loud. Loneliness can be very quiet. Sophia's journey looked completely different. She wasn't chasing headlines. She wasn't building a corporate empire. She wasn't trying to impress strangers. She was trying to help people. One person at a time. One student at a time. One opportunity at a time. The remarkable part is that she never started with wealth. She never started with influence. She never started with powerful connections. She started with compassion. And over time, that compassion created something extraordinary. The room full of successful people applauding Sophia wasn't celebrating a financial achievement. They were celebrating impact. The kind of impact that continues long after applause ends. The kind that changes families, communities, entire generations. The kind that leaves the world better than it was before. What makes this story unforgettable isn't that James became wealthy. It's not that Sophia earned recognition. It's not even the emotional reunion waiting later that night. What makes this story unforgettable is the lesson hidden inside it. A lesson many people learn too late. The person standing beside you today may be carrying a value that can't be measured by money. The person others overlook may possess the character, heart, and purpose that eventually changes countless lives. And sometimes the people we underestimate become the very people who teach us what truly matters. The shocking part? When James walked away from Sophia, he genuinely believed he was choosing the better future. He believed he was protecting his success. He believed he was making the responsible choice. For years, he never questioned that decision, until one unforgettable night forced him to see everything differently. A night that began with a charity gala, a giant screen, a standing ovation, and a face from his past that he never expected to see again. What happened between James and Sophia? How did two people who once planned a future together end up separated for an entire decade? Why did James allow other people's opinions to influence the most important relationship in his life? How did Sophia go from struggling to pay her bills to becoming one of the most admired people in New York? And what happened when they finally stood face to face again after 10 long years? Stay with me, because this story isn't just about love. It isn't just about heartbreak. It isn't just about success. It's about purpose. It's about second chances. And it's about discovering that the most valuable things in life are often the things money can never buy. To understand how everything led to that emotional night, we need to go back 10 years. Back before the applause. Back before the scholarships. Back before the recognition. Back to a rainy evening in New York. The night James and Sophia met for the very first time, 10 years earlier. Long before the charity gala. Long before the standing ovation. Long before thousands of students knew Sophia's name. New York woke up the same way it always did. With noise. With movement. With millions of people rushing toward goals that only they could see. The city never seemed to pause. At 6 o'clock in the morning, subway trains were already carrying workers across boroughs. Coffee shops were serving customers before sunrise. Delivery trucks filled the streets. Office lights flickered on inside skyscrapers. Some people were beginning another ordinary day. Others were chasing dreams. Others were simply trying to survive. New York made room for all of them, but not equally. A few miles could separate two completely different lives. And on that particular morning, James and Sophia woke up in those different worlds. James stood inside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan apartment. A steaming cup of coffee rested in his hand. Below him, traffic flowed through the city like a living river. Yellow taxis moved between intersections. Pedestrians hurried along sidewalks. The skyline stretched endlessly into the distance. Most people would have called the view breathtaking. James barely noticed it anymore. He had lived there for years. Success had become normal. The apartment was spacious, modern, quiet. Every piece of furniture had been carefully selected. Everything looked impressive, yet something about the place often felt empty. Not sad, not depressing, just empty. Like a beautifully decorated room that nobody truly lived in. James checked the time. His schedule for the day was already packed. Investor meeting, board presentation, lunch with potential partners, conference call, dinner with clients. Another day, another set of responsibilities. He walked toward the kitchen and reviewed emails on his phone. Messages continued arriving faster than he could answer them. Investors wanted updates. Executives needed decisions. Partners expected responses. People depended on him. Most would have envied his position. Few understood the pressure attached to it. His technology company had grown quickly, faster than anyone predicted. Every month brought new opportunities. Every opportunity brought new expectations. And expectations never seemed to stop growing. James placed the phone down for a moment. Silence filled the apartment. He took another sip of coffee. Then the phone vibrated again. Back to work. Back to decisions. Back to building. The day had officially begun. Across the East River, Sophia's morning looked very different. Her alarm sounded before sunrise. She reached across the room and quickly silenced it. For several seconds she remained under the blanket, not because she was lazy, because she was tired. The kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't completely fix. She sat up slowly. The small apartment was quiet. Simple furniture filled the room. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just enough. The monthly rent consumed a large portion of her income. Every dollar mattered. Every expense required planning. Sophia stretched before standing. Another long day waited for her. Actually, 2 long days. Her daytime job and her evening job. The routine wasn't easy, but complaining wouldn't pay bills, so she rarely complained. She walked toward the kitchen and prepared a simple breakfast. While eating, she reviewed notes for several teenagers she would mentor later that morning. A small smile appeared. The students always managed to brighten her day, even on difficult days. Especially on difficult days, she genuinely cared about them. Not because she was paid to care, because she remembered what encouragement could do for a person. Growing up, many people had invested time in her. Teachers, neighbors, church members, community leaders, people who believed every child deserved a chance. Now she wanted to do the same for others. Sophia finished breakfast and gathered her belongings. Outside, Brooklyn was slowly waking up. Store owners prepared for customers. Street vendors arranged merchandise. Children waited for school buses. Neighbors greeted one another from sidewalks and apartment steps. Sophia smiled at several familiar faces during her walk. Many people knew each other, not because the neighborhood was small, because people actually took time to connect. One elderly woman waved from across the street. Sophia waved back. A man unlocking his storefront greeted her by name. She greeted him right back. Those small interactions mattered. Life felt lighter when people looked out for each other. By the time Sophia arrived at the community center, students were already gathering. Some laughed with friends. Others sat quietly before classes began. Sophia immediately noticed one teenager sitting alone. She changed direction and walked over. "Morning." The teenager shrugged. "Morning." Sophia sat beside him. "You look like somebody stole your favorite breakfast." A small smile appeared. "Maybe they did. There we go." "What?" "You smiled." The teenager rolled his eyes. Sophia laughed. The mood immediately improved. Moments like that happened every day. She understood something many adults forgot. Sometimes people didn't need solutions first. Sometimes they simply needed someone to notice them. Back in Manhattan, James entered a conference room overlooking the city. Several people were already waiting, laptops open, documents organized, coffee cups scattered across the table. The meeting began immediately. Numbers filled screens, growth projections, revenue forecasts, market opportunities. Everything looked promising. The company continued expanding. The presentation received positive reactions. People complimented James repeatedly. Strong leadership, strong vision, strong execution. He accepted the praise politely. Yet by the end of the meeting, the compliments faded almost as quickly as they arrived. Another target would replace the current one. Another challenge would appear. Success often worked that way. The finish line kept moving. Meanwhile, Sophia spent her afternoon helping students complete assignments, prepare applications, and discuss goals. The work wasn't glamorous. No magazines would write articles about it. No investors would celebrate it. But she loved it. One student excitedly shared a recent achievement. Sophia celebrated as though she had received the accomplishment herself. Another student struggled with self-confidence. Sophia spent extra time encouraging them. Hours passed quickly. Purpose had a way of doing that. By late afternoon, many workers headed home. Sophia headed toward her second job. The restaurant where she worked as a waitress became busy during evenings. The shifts were demanding. Long hours on her feet. Constant movement. Difficult customers occasionally appeared. Yet she handled most situations with patience. Co-workers often noticed. One evening, a customer became frustrated about a delayed order. Sophia listened calmly, apologized, solved the issue, and somehow managed to leave the customer smiling. Afterward, another employee shook their head. "I don't know how you stay so positive." Sophia laughed. "Oh, trust me. I'm not positive all the time." "You seem like it." "That's because nobody pays to see me complain." Both laughed. The evening continued. At nearly the same time, James attended a business dinner in an upscale restaurant. The food was exceptional. The service was flawless. The conversation remained focused on deals and opportunities. Everyone at the table wanted something. Partnerships, investments, access, influence. James understood the game. He had played it for years. Yet occasionally he wondered what conversations looked like when nobody needed anything, when people simply enjoyed each other's company. The thought passed quickly. Business resumed. As the evening progressed, New York continued moving around them. Millions of stories unfolding simultaneously. Some filled with opportunity, others filled with struggle, most existing somewhere in between. James and Sophia never crossed paths that day. They didn't know each other existed. They couldn't have imagined how important they would become to one another. But the values guiding their lives were already taking shape. James had been raised in a family that deeply respected achievement. Accomplishments mattered. Success mattered. Reputation mattered. Goals were pursued aggressively. Excellence was expected. Those lessons helped him build an impressive career. They taught discipline, ambition, determination, and they served him well. Sophia's upbringing emphasized different priorities. Family gatherings lasted for hours. Neighbors supported one another. Faith provided strength during difficult seasons. People shared resources when someone needed help. Children learned that character mattered. Kindness mattered. Community mattered. Nobody claimed life was easy, but nobody was expected to face challenges alone. Those lessons shaped Sophia long before adulthood. They influenced how she viewed success, how she treated people, how she measured fulfillment. Neither perspective was completely wrong. Both contained value. Neither James nor Sophia realized that one day those two worldviews would collide. And when they did, love would enter the picture. Love often brings people together, but sometimes the beliefs people carry can quietly push them apart. That future remained far away. For now, they continued living separate lives beneath the same New York skyline. James chasing growth, Sophia serving others, neither knowing that a single rainy evening was approaching. An ordinary evening, a small coffee shop, a broken umbrella, a spilled drink, and a conversation that would change both of their lives forever. The following Thursday began like dozens of Thursdays before it. Busy, demanding, predictable. At least that was what James thought when he woke up that morning. His calendar was packed from beginning to end. Several meetings occupied most of his day. Investors wanted updates. Partners wanted answers. Executives wanted decisions. By lunchtime, he already felt mentally exhausted. One meeting ran longer than expected. Another became more complicated than necessary. By late afternoon, James found himself sitting across from a group of potential investors inside a conference room in Midtown Manhattan. The conversation had lasted nearly 2 hours. Nobody seemed willing to make a final decision. Questions repeated themselves. Concerns were raised. More projections were requested. More explanations followed. By the time the meeting finally ended, James felt drained. Not angry, just tired. The kind of tiredness that came from spending an entire day convincing people of things they already knew. He shook hands, exchanged polite smiles, promised follow-up discussions. Then stepped outside. The weather had changed. Dark clouds filled the sky. A cold wind moved through the streets. Several pedestrians quickened their pace. Others glanced upward. Rain was coming. James loosened his tie slightly as he walked. His driver had been delayed in traffic. Rather than wait, he decided to walk a few blocks. Fresh air might help clear his head. For several minutes, everything remained calm. Then the rain arrived. Without warning, heavy drops struck sidewalks, storefront windows, parked cars, pedestrians, immediately scattered. Some opened umbrellas, others rushed toward awnings. Within seconds, the streets transformed into a moving crowd searching for cover. James looked around. A small coffee shop sat half a block away. He headed toward it. The rain intensified before he reached the entrance. By the time he stepped inside, water covered the shoulders of his suit jacket. A bell chimed overhead. Warm air greeted him. The rich smell of coffee filled the room. For the first time all day, James relaxed slightly. The shop wasn't crowded. A handful of customers sat at tables. Soft music played quietly in the background. Several people worked on laptops. Others chatted with friends. Nobody seemed interested in business deals. Nobody appeared concerned with stock prices. The atmosphere felt strangely peaceful. James approached the counter and ordered coffee. While waiting, he glanced around the room. That was when he noticed Sophia. She sat alone near a window. Several papers covered the table in front of her. A notebook rested beside them. She appeared completely focused, occasionally writing notes, occasionally reviewing documents, occasionally pausing to think. There was nothing dramatic about the scene, yet something about her immediately stood out. Not because she was trying to attract attention. Quite the opposite. She seemed completely unaware of everyone around her. Focused, comfortable, genuine. James found himself looking a moment longer than intended. Then he quickly looked away. His coffee arrived. He thanked the employee and turned. Unfortunately, his timing couldn't have been worse. A customer stepped backward unexpectedly. James adjusted his movement. The coffee cup tilted. A portion of the drink splashed forward, directly onto the papers covering Sophia's table. For one horrifying second, nobody moved. James stared. Sophia stared. Brown liquid slowly spread across several pages. James closed his eyes. Perfect. Sophia looked down at the mess, then back at him. James immediately stepped forward. "Oh no. I'm so sorry." Sophia looked at the papers again. The silence lasted long enough to make James uncomfortable. Then she said something completely unexpected. "Well, that's one way to edit my work." James blinked. "What?" She pointed at the stained papers. "You clearly disagreed with something." For a second, he wasn't sure whether she was serious. Then he noticed the smile. He laughed, despite himself. The tension disappeared instantly. "I'm really sorry." "I know. I can replace everything." Sophia examined the pages. Maybe. Depends. Depends on what? How attached you are to your coffee." James laughed again. A genuine laugh. Not the polite kind he used during meetings. The real kind. The kind that arrived unexpectedly, Sophia noticed. "So you do know how to laugh." "What does that mean?" "You looked very serious when you walked in." "I had a long day." "You and half of New York." Fair point. The conversation should have ended there. Most accidental encounters did, yet neither of them seemed eager to walk away. James helped gather the papers. Fortunately, most remained readable. The damage was limited. Sophia reorganized everything while continuing to tease him. "You know, most people introduce themselves before attacking paperwork." James smiled. "James, Sophia." They shook hands. Something about the interaction felt surprisingly easy. No awkward performance. No effort. Just conversation. Outside, rain continued striking the windows. Neither appeared to be leaving anytime soon. James glanced toward the empty seat across from her table. Sophia noticed. "You can sit down." "Are you sure?" "You already ruined the papers." She smiled. "At this point, we're practically friends." James laughed and accepted the invitation. For the next several minutes, conversation flowed naturally. Far more naturally than either expected. Sophia explained that she worked with teenagers through a community program. James listened. She spoke passionately about helping young people build confidence and pursue opportunities. The enthusiasm in her voice was impossible to miss. James found it refreshing. Most conversations he experienced focused on money, competition, growth, performance. Sophia talked about people, dreams, potential, community. It felt different. Eventually, she asked about him. "What do you do?" James hesitated. The question always created an interesting moment. Some people reacted differently once they learned about his position. He answered anyway. "I run a technology company." Sophia nodded. "That sounds stressful." James laughed. "That's usually not the first response." "What is?" "People normally ask questions." "About the company?" "About money." Sophia shrugged. "Why?" The simplicity of her response caught him off guard. "Why what?" "Why would I ask about your money?" James smiled. "You wouldn't?" "No. Not curious? Should I be?" He stared at her. Sophia continued sipping her drink. Completely serious. For perhaps the first time in years, Someone seemed entirely uninterested in his status. The realization felt oddly refreshing. Conversation continued. At one point, James described the investor meeting that had ruined his afternoon. Sophia listened carefully. When he finished, she raised an eyebrow. "Let me make sure I understand. Okay, you're stressed because people want to give you money." James immediately started laughing. Sophia laughed too. Several customers glanced over. Neither cared. The joke shouldn't have been that funny. Yet after a long day filled with serious conversations, it hit exactly right. James shook his head. "You make it sound ridiculous." "A little." "It isn't ridiculous." "I'm sure it isn't." Her smile suggested otherwise. The laughter lingered. Something was happening. Neither wanted to admit it yet, but both felt it. Comfort, ease, connection. The kind that rarely appears between strangers. The rain continued falling. Minutes became nearly an hour. Neither noticed. Sophia eventually gathered her papers. "I should probably leave." James looked toward the windows. The storm still showed no signs of stopping. At that exact moment, Sophia stood and reached for her umbrella. The handle detached immediately. Both stared at it. Half the umbrella remained in her hand. The other half dropped onto the floor. For a second, she simply looked at it, then looked at James, then back at the umbrella. "It appears my transportation strategy has failed." James laughed. "That thing looked ready for retirement. It survived 3 years. That's impressive. It deserved better." The conversation once again became effortless. James found himself smiling more than he had all week, maybe all month. Sophia examined the broken umbrella. Well, I'm going to get wet." James looked outside. Rain continued pouring. An idea appeared. Without overthinking, he spoke. "I can walk you part of the way." Sophia looked surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I know." For a brief moment, neither spoke. There was no pressure, no dramatic tension, just a simple offer. Sophia finally smiled. "Okay." They stepped outside together. Rain filled the streets. People hurried past beneath umbrellas. Traffic crawled through intersections. The city felt alive. James and Sophia walked side by side, talking, laughing, learning small things about each other. Neither realized how unusual the evening had become. James certainly didn't. He met countless people every year. Most conversations disappeared from memory within days. This one felt different. Not because Sophia was trying to impress him. She wasn't. Not because she cared about his success. She didn't. She challenged him, questioned him, teased him, treated him like a regular person. And surprisingly, that was exactly what made him want to know more. As they approached a corner where their paths would separate, both slowed. Neither seemed eager for the conversation to end. Sophia noticed it first. A small smile appeared. "You know, for somebody who attacks paperwork, you're not terrible company." James laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." It was. A brief silence followed. Comfortable. Natural. Then James asked the question he normally never asked this quickly. "Would you maybe like to get coffee sometime?" Sophia looked around dramatically. "We're literally standing outside a coffee shop." "You know what I mean." She laughed. "Yes?" The answer arrived immediately. No games. No hesitation. Just yes. James smiled. For reasons he couldn't fully explain. The response made him happier than it should have. They exchanged contact information, then stood there for another few seconds, neither rushing away, neither quite ready to leave. Finally, Sophia pointed down the street. "I should go." "You probably should." Neither moved. Sophia laughed. "Good night, James." "Good night, Sophia." She turned and continued walking. James remained where he was, watching, until she disappeared into the crowd. Only then did he start toward home. The rain still fell. Traffic still moved. The city remained exactly the same. Yet something about the evening felt important. Neither James nor Sophia knew where the connection would lead. Neither knew how much they would eventually mean to one another. All they knew was that a spilled coffee, a broken umbrella, and one unexpected conversation had created the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. James expected Sophia to cancel, not because she seemed unreliable, because life happened. People got busy. Plans changed, especially in New York. The city had a way of pulling people in 100 different directions at once. Yet 2 days after their rainy evening encounter, his phone buzzed. A message from Sophia, short, simple, exactly on time. For some reason, seeing her name on his screen made him smile. That smile stayed with him through the rest of the day. Their first official date happened the following weekend. James chose a restaurant in Manhattan, one of his favorites, the kind of place where reservations usually required planning weeks in advance. When Sophia arrived, she paused for a moment outside the entrance, not because she was intimidated, more amused than anything. As James approached, she looked at the building and shook her head. "You brought me somewhere that has a doorman." James laughed. "That's a problem?" "It depends." "On what?" "Whether the food is actually good, or if people just pay extra for the fancy doors." James laughed so hard that several nearby people looked over. That became one of the things he noticed about her immediately. Sophia never seemed impressed by things that usually impressed other people. Inside, the evening flowed effortlessly. Conversation moved naturally from one topic to another. Neither struggled to find something to say. Neither spent time trying to appear perfect. Sophia talked about the students she worked with. James talked about building his company. They discussed childhood memories, favorite foods, travel dreams, embarrassing moments. At one point, James described a disastrous presentation from early in his career. Sophia nearly laughed herself out of her chair. "You actually said that?" "I was nervous." "That's not nervous." "Then what was it?" "That was a complete disaster." James couldn't even defend himself. She was right. The rest of the evening continued the same way. Comfortable, natural, easy. When the date ended, neither wanted it to end. That realization surprised both of them. The second date happened a few days later, then another, then another. Weeks passed. What started as curiosity slowly became anticipation. James found himself looking forward to her messages, looking forward to hearing her voice, looking forward to spending time with her. The feeling was unfamiliar, not because he had never dated before, because most of his previous relationships felt different. Many people seemed fascinated by what he did. Sophia seemed interested in who he was. There was a difference, a significant one. One Saturday evening, James invited Sophia to another restaurant. This one overlooked the Manhattan skyline. As they sat near the window, city lights stretched across the distance. Most people would have spent half the evening admiring the view. Sophia barely noticed it. Instead, she was telling a story about one of her students. James listened closely. Her entire face changed when she spoke about helping people. The enthusiasm wasn't forced. It wasn't performative. It was genuine. When she finished, James smiled. "You really love what you do." Sophia looked surprised. "Is it that obvious?" "Very." She laughed softly. "Maybe." "No, definitely." For a moment she looked out the window, then back at him. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I never expected my life to look like this." "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "I thought success would feel different." James leaned forward slightly. "Different? How?" "I don't know." She considered the question. Growing up, everybody talks about success like it's a destination. And I think it's more about impact. James thought about that. Impact. The word stayed with him. Most people in his world talked about growth, profit, expansion. Sophia talked about impact. The conversation lingered in his mind long after the date ended. As the relationship deepened, Sophia began introducing James to parts of her life he had never experienced before. One Friday evening, she invited him to a community event in Brooklyn. James accepted immediately. When he arrived, music filled the street. Children laughed nearby. Families gathered around food tables. Neighbors greeted one another warmly. The atmosphere felt completely different from the networking events he usually attended. Nobody seemed concerned about titles. Nobody appeared interested in status. People simply enjoyed being together. Sophia walked through the crowd with ease. Every few steps, someone greeted her. She knew names, families, stories. People genuinely seemed happy to see her. James noticed. A woman approached and hugged Sophia. A few minutes later, another person waved enthusiastically. Then another. Then another. Eventually, James smiled. "You know everybody." Sophia laughed. "No. Feels like it. Trust me." "I don't." A few minutes later, somebody called her name from across the street. James raised an eyebrow. Sophia laughed again. "Okay. Maybe a lot of people." For the first time, James saw a different type of influence. Not corporate influence. Not financial influence. Human influence. The kind built through relationships. The kind built through showing up for people consistently. The realization stayed with him. Weeks later, Sophia invited him to a neighborhood block party. James wasn't entirely sure what to expect. He quickly discovered that expectations didn't matter. Within minutes, someone handed him food. Someone else started a conversation. Music played throughout the afternoon. Children raced across the street. People danced, laughed, shared stories. James found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did. Nobody cared that he was a CEO. Nobody cared how much money he made. Nobody asked about investments. Nobody wanted business advice. For once, he wasn't James the executive. He was simply James, and surprisingly, he liked that version of himself. At one point, Sophia noticed him watching everything around him. "What?" James smiled. "This is nice." She laughed. "That's a very corporate description." "What should I call it?" Sophia looked around. People talking, music playing, neighbors helping each other, families sharing meals. She smiled. Community. The word remained with him. Community. Simple, powerful, increasingly important. The months continued passing. The relationship strengthened naturally. Neither forced anything, neither rushed anything. Yet both recognized what was happening. They were becoming important parts of each other's lives. Sophia eventually invited James to a family gathering. For the first time, he felt nervous. The feeling surprised him. He negotiated business deals worth millions of dollars. Yet meeting Sophia's family somehow felt more intimidating. When they arrived, laughter could already be heard from inside. The gathering felt warm immediately. Conversations overlapped. Food filled tables. People moved comfortably through the house. Nobody appeared concerned with appearances. Nobody seemed interested in impressing anyone. They simply enjoyed being together. James spent the afternoon listening to stories, sharing meals, answering questions, laughing more than expected. At one point, he noticed something. People genuinely listened when someone spoke. Phones disappeared. Attention remained present. The connection felt real. Later, while helping clean up, James looked toward the room where everyone continued talking and laughing. Sophia noticed. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah. You look thoughtful." James hesitated, then smiled. "I like this." Sophia followed his gaze. The room, the conversations, the family, the warmth. A small smile appeared. "Me too." That evening stayed with him, long after it ended, long after he returned home. His apartment felt quieter than usual, not lonely, just different. He couldn't stop comparing the atmosphere. One environment centered around achievement, the other centered around connection. Both had value, yet one clearly nourished something inside him that had been missing. As the relationship continued growing, subtle changes began appearing. James became more present during conversations, more patient, more reflective. Sophia noticed it before he did. One evening they sat together after dinner. Nothing dramatic happened. No major event. No emotional speech. Just conversation. Sophia studied him for a moment. "What?" She smiled. "You've changed." James laughed. "I have not." "You have." "How?" Sophia thought carefully. "You listen more." James smiled. "That's because you talk a lot." Sophia pointed at him. "See? That wasn't true 6 months ago." Both laughed. Yet underneath the humor, she was right. He had changed. Not completely, but enough to notice. The relationship was shaping both of them. The strongest relationships often do. Not by forcing change, by inspiring growth. Months turned into more than a year. The connection deepened steadily. Neither needed grand declarations. The evidence appeared in smaller moments. The comfort, the trust, the consistency, the way they naturally included each other in future plans. One evening, after spending the entire day together, James drove Sophia home. Neither seemed eager for the night to end. As they sat parked outside her apartment building, conversation slowed. Comfortable silence settled between them. Sophia smiled. "What?" James shook his head. "Nothing. That's never true." He laughed. Okay, what?" "I was just thinking." "Dangerous." "Very." Sophia smiled. James looked at her for a moment, long enough that the teasing disappeared, long enough that the atmosphere shifted. Not awkward, just honest. Then he said something neither of them took lightly. "I can't imagine my life without you in it." The words weren't planned. They simply arrived. Sophia's smile softened. For several seconds, neither spoke. The statement carried weight, because both understood what it meant. This was no longer casual dating, no longer curiosity, no longer uncertainty. Something deeper had taken root, something real. Sophia reached for his hand, a simple gesture, yet it said everything. Neither needed a long speech. The moment spoke for itself. What neither of them knew was that life was preparing a challenge neither expected. A challenge powerful enough to test everything they were building together. For now, though, they remained happy, hopeful, in love. And before we continue, take a moment to tell us in the comments. Do you believe love can survive when two people come from completely different worlds? And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Mr. George Stories for more unforgettable life lessons. Because James and Sophia's story is only beginning, and the closer they move toward a future together, the closer they move toward the decision that would change both of their lives forever. The conversation inside the car stayed with both of them, not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. "I can't imagine my life without you in it." James hadn't planned to say those words. Yet once they were spoken, neither of them tried to take them back. The relationship continued moving forward after that night, naturally, comfortably, like two people who were no longer wondering whether they belonged together. Instead, they were beginning to wonder what came next. A few weeks later, Sophia sat across from James during dinner. The restaurant wasn't nearly as important as the conversation. The food arrived. Neither paid much attention to it. They were too busy talking. "What did you want to be when you were a kid?" James asked. Sophia laughed. "You mean before reality showed up?" "Exactly." She thought for a moment. Honestly, I wanted to change people's lives." James smiled. "You actually did that?" "No." Sophia shook her head. "I'm trying to." "There's a difference. You spend your days helping people." She smiled softly. "And you spend your days building things." James leaned back slightly. "That's one way to describe it." "It is." For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The comfort between them had become effortless. There was no need to impress, no need to perform, no need to carefully calculate every word. Sophia could tell when James was stressed before he said anything. James could tell when Sophia was exhausted simply by looking at her. The relationship had reached that stage, where understanding became almost instinctive. One evening, Sophia arrived at James's apartment carrying takeout containers. James opened the door and laughed. "What happened to dinner reservations?" "I changed my mind." "You changed your mind?" Yes. She walked inside. I decided I wanted food that actually fills people up. James followed her. You realize I spent 20 minutes choosing a shirt. Sophia looked at him. I appreciate your sacrifice. James laughed. The evening became one of their favorites. No expensive restaurant. No formal plans. Just food, conversation, and hours spent talking about things that mattered. The future became a frequent topic, not intentionally. It simply happened. Conversations naturally drifted there. Vacations they hoped to take, places they wanted to visit, goals they wanted to accomplish. The interesting part wasn't the plans themselves. It was the language. Without realizing it, they had stopped saying, I. More often, they said we. We should go there someday. We need to try that. We should do that. Small words, big meaning. One Saturday afternoon, they spent several hours walking through Central Park. The weather was perfect. Neither felt rushed. At one point they found an empty bench and sat down. People moved around them. Families, couples, tourists, runners. Life unfolded in every direction. Sophia watched a young couple pushing a stroller. A smile appeared. James noticed. What? Nothing. That smile means something. Sophia laughed. Maybe. James waited. She finally looked at him. Do you ever think about having a family? The question wasn't awkward. It wasn't unexpected either. James considered it carefully. Yeah. Sophia seemed surprised. Yeah? Of course. She studied him. You've never talked about it. I know. Why? James thought for a moment, then shrugged. I guess I never met the right person before. For a second, Sophia didn't say anything. She looked away, trying unsuccessfully to hide her smile. James smiled too. The conversation moved on, but both remembered it. Moments like that accumulated over time. Little pieces of a larger future. A future neither questioned anymore. As months passed, marriage occasionally entered conversations. Not directly, not seriously at first. More like teasing. One evening, Sophia pointed toward a wedding taking place near a community event. Music filled the air. Guests laughed. The celebration looked joyful. Sophia smiled. That looks expensive. James laughed. That's your observation? Absolutely. You don't think it looks romantic? It does. She pointed toward the decorations. But that still looks expensive. James shook his head. You are impossible. Sophia laughed. The subject returned again, several weeks later, and again after that. Each time, a little more seriously. Eventually, neither avoided it. One night they sat together overlooking the city skyline. The conversation drifted toward long-term plans. Careers, goals, dreams, future possibilities. Sophia leaned against his shoulder. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? James answered immediately. Hopefully still growing the company. She nodded. What else? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? You always answer work questions. James laughed. I do not. You absolutely do. He thought for a moment. Then his expression softened. Honestly? Always. James looked out across the city, then back at her. I want a home. Sophia smiled. You already have one. No, he shook his head. A real home. Something about the answer touched her, because she understood exactly what he meant. A home wasn't a building. It was people, connection, belonging. The conversation stayed with both of them. More importantly, it revealed something. James wasn't simply imagining future business success anymore. He was imagining a future with Sophia inside it. That distinction mattered a lot. Months later, while helping Sophia clean up after a community event, James found himself watching her interact with several students. One conversation became two. Two became five. Every person seemed comfortable around her. Valued, encouraged, seen. James smiled quietly. Sophia eventually walked over. What? James shook his head. Nothing. She narrowed her eyes. That's becoming a habit. James laughed. Maybe. Sophia folded her arms. Tell me. James hesitated, then answered honestly. I'm proud of you. The words surprised her. Not because they were dramatic, because they were sincere. Sophia looked away briefly, a little emotional. Then she smiled. Thank you. Neither made a big deal out of it. Neither needed to. The moment spoke for itself. By now, the relationship felt stronger than ever. Trust had been built slowly. Consistency had done its work. Neither wondered whether the other person cared. They knew. That certainty created security. Especially for Sophia. For the first time in years, she felt completely confident about where her life was heading. Not because everything was perfect. Because she trusted the person beside her. James had become her best friend. Her partner. The person she called first with good news. And the person she wanted beside her during difficult moments. She no longer worried about whether the relationship had a future. In her mind, the future was already taking shape. The only question was when, not if. When. James found himself thinking similarly. Marriage stopped feeling like a distant possibility. It began feeling inevitable. He imagined waking up beside Sophia years from now, sharing holidays, building traditions, creating a life together. The thoughts appeared more frequently than ever before, and unlike earlier stages of his life, they didn't scare him. They felt right. For a while, everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. The relationship was strong. The future appeared clear. Both believed they were heading toward the same destination. Neither realized that outside voices were already beginning to notice, and outside opinions were about to become far more influential than either expected. For a while, everything seemed simple. Not perfect. No relationship ever was, but simple. James loved Sophia. Sophia loved James. The future felt clear. Every month brought them closer. Every conversation made them stronger. Every shared experience reinforced what they already knew. They belonged together. At least that was what both of them believed. The complications didn't arrive all at once. They arrived quietly. Small comments, subtle observations, casual questions. The kind people often pretend are harmless. At first, James barely noticed them. One afternoon, he attended a business lunch with several executives. The discussion focused primarily on expansion opportunities, market growth, potential partnerships, the usual subjects. Near the end of the meeting, the conversation shifted. One executive smiled. So, how's your girlfriend? James looked up. She's good. Still together? James nodded. Very much. The executive exchanged a glance with another person at the table. A small look, barely noticeable, but James noticed. The executive smiled again. Things getting serious? James didn't hesitate. Yes? Another brief glance passed across the table. The reaction irritated him slightly. What? The executive laughed. Nothing. Clearly, something. The man shrugged. I'm just surprised. Why? Another pause. A careful one. The executive seemed to choose his words deliberately. I don't know. He smiled. You've always been ambitious. James immediately understood what he meant. The conversation ended there, at least on the surface. But the comment stayed with him, not because he agreed, because he didn't. That evening he mentioned it to Sophia. They were eating dinner together. Sophia listened quietly, then smiled. What? James asked. She shrugged. Nothing. That's not true. Sophia laughed, softly. People have opinions. That's not an answer. It kind of is. James shook his head. They don't even know you. Sophia reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Then their opinion doesn't matter. The answer should have ended the discussion, and for a while, it did. Yet similar moments continued appearing. A few weeks later, another conversation happened. Different setting, different people, same implication. One person jokingly suggested that successful executives usually married within certain social circles. Another made an observation about compatibility. Another spoke about public image. Nobody openly criticized Sophia. That wasn't how these conversations worked. The message always arrived indirectly, wrapped inside smiles, hidden inside suggestions, presented as concern. James dismissed the comments repeatedly, at least in public. Privately, something uncomfortable was happening. The comments were becoming harder to ignore, not because they were convincing, because they were constant. A thought repeated often enough can become difficult to silence. Meanwhile, Sophia remained completely unaware of most of these conversations. She continued living exactly as she always had, working, helping students, building relationships, planning community events, the life she loved, the life that gave her purpose. One evening, James attended a formal event connected to his company. Sophia joined him. At first, everything seemed fine. People greeted them politely. Conversations flowed naturally. Nothing appeared unusual. Then James noticed something. Small reactions. Quick judgments. The kind people think they're hiding. A glance at Sophia's dress. Questions about her profession. Moments where attention shifted once they learned she worked at a community center. Nobody said anything openly disrespectful. Yet, the difference was there. James saw it. And unfortunately, he couldn't stop seeing it. The realization bothered him more than he wanted to admit, not because he cared what strangers thought. At least, that was what he told himself. But part of him did care, a part he hadn't fully confronted. After the event ended, they walked toward the car together. Sophia seemed relaxed. James seemed distracted. She noticed immediately. What happened? James looked over. What do you mean? You've been quiet all night. I'm fine. Sophia smiled slightly. No, you're not. James sighed. It's nothing. Sophia waited. Eventually, he spoke. Did anything feel strange to you tonight? She thought about it, then shrugged. A little. James looked surprised. You noticed? Sophia laughed softly. James, what? I'm not blind. The answer caught him off guard. Sophia continued walking. They didn't know what to do with me. James frowned. What does that mean? She smiled. They expected somebody different? The simplicity of her answer bothered him even more, because she wasn't angry. She wasn't offended. She simply understood. That made it harder to dismiss. The subject lingered in his mind long afterward. Weeks passed. The comments continued, sometimes from business associates, sometimes from people connected to his professional life, sometimes from individuals who barely knew Sophia at all. Each conversation left behind a tiny seed of doubt. Not about Sophia, about the relationship, about compatibility, about whether their worlds truly fit together. James hated those thoughts. He genuinely did, yet they kept returning. One evening, he visited his family. The conversation started normally. Work, business, current events. Then Sophia's name came up. The atmosphere changed slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Questions followed. Polite questions. Carefully phrased questions. Questions that sounded supportive while pushing towards something else. James answered patiently, at first. Then frustration slowly entered the discussion. He defended Sophia, repeatedly. Explained who she was. Explained why he loved her. Explained why the relationship mattered. Yet somehow, every answer led to another concern, another question, another hesitation. By the time he left that evening, he felt emotionally exhausted. Not because anyone had yelled, because nobody had. The entire conversation remained calm, and that made it harder. There was no obvious villain, no dramatic confrontation, just steady pressure, the kind that accumulates over time. Back in Brooklyn, Sophia noticed subtle changes before James recognized them himself. The first change was small. Calls became shorter. Not always, just occasionally. The second change followed. He seemed distracted more often, present physically, absent mentally. The third change bothered her most. Conversations about the future became less frequent. Not gone, just less frequent. At first, she ignored it. Relationships moved through different seasons. People became busy. Work created stress. Life happened. She didn't want to overreact. Still, the feeling remained. One night they sat together after dinner. The atmosphere felt different. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Sophia studied him carefully. James was looking at his phone, something he rarely did when they spent time together. James, he looked up. Yeah? Are you okay? Of course. The answer arrived too quickly. Sophia noticed. James noticed that she noticed. An awkward silence followed. Finally, Sophia smiled gently. You know you can talk to me. I know. Then talk to me. James looked away. Not because he wanted to hide something, because he didn't know how to explain what was happening. The doubts, the pressure, the conflicting emotions. None of it made sense, especially because his feelings for Sophia hadn't changed. He still loved her, deeply. Yet something inside him felt unsettled. Sophia waited. Eventually, he forced a smile. I'm just tired. Sophia nodded. But she didn't fully believe it. The conversation moved on. The concern remained. Over the following months, the distance slowly increased. Not enough for outsiders to notice. Enough for Sophia to feel. Enough for James to feel too. He became more reflective, more cautious, sometimes quieter. The future that once felt obvious no longer felt simple. The change frustrated him because he couldn't point to a specific problem. Sophia hadn't changed. Their relationship hadn't suddenly become unhealthy. Nothing dramatic had happened. Yet pressure from the outside continued building, and with every passing month, it became harder to separate his own thoughts from the opinions surrounding him. Sophia tried to remain patient, tried to trust the relationship, tried to believe that whatever was happening would pass. But occasionally she caught him staring into space, thinking, worrying, carrying something he refused to share. And each time it happened, a small knot formed in her stomach. Not fear, not yet, just concern, a feeling she couldn't quite explain. James felt it too. The difference was that he knew exactly where it was coming from. The questions, the expectations, the pressure, the endless suggestions about what his future should look like. A future that increasingly seemed to leave less room for the woman he loved. Neither of them knew it yet, but the distance growing between them wasn't temporary. It was moving them toward a conversation neither wanted to have. A conversation that would change everything. And when it finally arrived, neither of their lives would ever be the same again. The conversation neither of them wanted arrived on a cold evening in New York. Not with shouting, not with betrayal, not because somebody stopped loving the other person overnight. The most painful endings rarely happen that way. Sometimes relationships break apart while love is still present. That was what made this night so devastating. For weeks, James had been wrestling with thoughts he couldn't silence. Every concern, every comment, every warning, every opinion, they had accumulated inside his mind until they became impossible to ignore. He hated that they affected him. He hated that they continued returning. Most of all, he hated what those thoughts were pushing him toward. Several times he tried convincing himself that everything would be fine. Several times he told himself to stop overthinking. Several times he promised himself he would move forward and stop listening to outside voices. Yet every attempt failed. The doubts always returned. Not because he loved Sophia less, because fear had started competing with love. Fear of judgment, fear of complications, fear of choosing a future that other people questioned. The worst part was that he knew exactly what he was doing. Deep down, he knew. That realization made it even harder. One afternoon, James finally sent Sophia a message. A simple request. Could they meet that evening? Sophia smiled when she saw it. For months, she had been sensing that something important was approaching. Something bigger than the small changes she had noticed. Something bigger than the emotional distance. She couldn't explain why, but hope immediately entered her heart. The timing felt significant. The message felt significant. Even James's tone felt different. By the time she finished work that day, she found herself smiling more than usual. For the first time in weeks, Excitement replaced concern. She stood in front of her mirror that evening, longer than normal. Not because she was obsessed with appearances, because she wanted the night to matter. A small smile remained on her face as she got ready. Several memories drifted through her mind. The rainy evening they met, the first date, the laughter, the late-night conversations, the plans they had made, the future they had discussed, a future that seemed closer than ever. Sophia looked down at her hands for a moment, then laughed quietly to herself. The thought felt almost ridiculous, yet she couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe tonight was the night. Maybe James was finally ready. Maybe all those conversations about the future were leading exactly where she believed they were. Marriage. The word felt both exciting and comforting. Not because she wanted a wedding, because she wanted a life with him. She wanted the ordinary moments, the shared mornings, the conversations after difficult days, the years they would build together, the future she had already started imagining. Meanwhile, James sat alone before leaving for the meeting. The silence inside his apartment felt heavy. Several times, he considered canceling. Several times, he picked up his phone. Several times, he put it back down. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt easy. Because no matter how he approached the conversation, somebody was going to get hurt. And he already knew who that person would be. Eventually, he left. The drive felt longer than usual. His thoughts refused to settle. Every memory seemed to fight against the decision he was preparing to make. Sophia laughing. Sophia encouraging him. Sophia standing beside him during difficult moments. Sophia believing in him. The memories arrived one after another, each one making the conversation ahead feel even more impossible. By the time he arrived, he almost turned around. Almost, but not quite. Sophia arrived a few minutes later. The moment she saw him, she smiled. A genuine smile. The kind that comes from trust. The kind that comes from believing good news is waiting. James felt his stomach tighten. For a brief second, he couldn't look directly at her. Sophia immediately noticed. That familiar concern returned. Still she sat down. Still, she remained hopeful. Hey. The conversation started awkwardly. Neither seemed comfortable. Sophia tried to lighten the mood. James struggled to respond. The difference was impossible to ignore. Finally, Sophia placed her hands on the table. Okay. James looked up. Okay, what? Something's wrong. Silence. Not long. Long enough. Sophia's smile slowly disappeared. James looked away, then back at her, then away again. The hesitation told her everything. Fear began replacing hope. A knot formed inside her chest. What is it? James took a slow breath. The words refused to come easily, because saying them would make them real. Eventually, he forced himself to speak. I've been thinking a lot lately. Sophia immediately knew she wasn't going to like what came next. People rarely start important conversations that way. Still, she listened. James continued. I don't know if we're heading toward the same future anymore. For a moment, Sophia simply stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. What? James swallowed hard. This isn't easy. Then don't make it harder. Her voice remained calm, but the hurt was already visible. James looked down, then back at her. I love you. Sophia's expression tightened. No. James frowned. What? She shook her head slowly. Don't start with that. The room became quiet. Sophia wasn't angry. Not yet. She was scared. Scared because she could already feel what was coming. James continued anyway. I love you, but... The moment the word left his mouth, Sophia closed her eyes. That single word changed everything. But the word people use when love is no longer enough. The word that separates promises from reality. James kept talking, explaining, trying to make the impossible sound reasonable. He spoke about different paths, different lifestyles, different expectations, different worlds. The explanations continued. Sophia listened. The more he spoke, the quieter she became. Not because she agreed, because she was beginning to understand. The real conversation wasn't happening on the surface. It was happening underneath. James eventually stopped talking. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Sophia looked at him carefully. Really looked at him. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she asked the question that mattered most. A simple question. One sentence. One truth. One answer. Would you still be saying this if I had money? The world seemed to stop. James opened his mouth, then closed it. No answer came. Not because he didn't hear the question, because he had, perfectly. Sophia watched him, waiting, not hoping, waiting. The silence stretched between them. Longer, longer, long enough. James didn't need to answer. The silence answered for him. Sophia felt her heart break in that moment. Not because he admitted it, because he couldn't deny it. Every explanation suddenly became clear. Every concern, every hesitation, every doubt. They all led back to the same place. Money, status, perception. Sophia looked away. For several seconds, she fought to maintain composure. The tears threatened to appear. She refused to let them. Not there. Not in front of him. When she finally looked back, her eyes had changed. Not angry. Not bitter, just hurt. Deeply hurt. I can't believe this. James immediately leaned forward. Sophia, no. She shook her head. You don't get to do that. His voice softened. I'm trying to be honest. Sophia laughed. A painful laugh. Now? The word hit harder than he expected. She stood slowly, not dramatically, not emotionally, almost quietly, which somehow made it worse. James stood too. Sophia, please. She looked at him, for what felt like the final time. The man she loved. The man she trusted. The man she thought she would marry. Standing right in front of her. Choosing fear over love. Choosing approval over commitment. Choosing the safer option. The practical option. The acceptable option. Sophia nodded slowly, almost to herself. Then she spoke. I hope it was worth it. The words weren't angry. That made them devastating. Because they were sincere. James felt something inside him sink, yet he said nothing. Sophia picked up her belongings. Neither moved toward the other. Neither reached out. The distance between them suddenly felt enormous. She turned, then began walking away. Every step felt unreal. Every step hurt. The future she had imagined disappeared with each one. The life she thought they were building, gone. The dreams, gone. The certainty, gone. By the time she reached the door, tears filled her eyes. She refused to look back, because looking back would only make it harder. A few seconds later she was gone. James remained where he was, frozen. The silence around him felt overwhelming. Part of him wanted to run after her. Part of him wanted to take everything back. Part of him wanted to undo the last 30 minutes entirely. Yet he stayed exactly where he was, because another part of him continued repeating the same message. This is the practical decision. This is the responsible decision. This is the smart decision. The phrases echoed through his mind, again, and again, and again. He held on to them, because the alternative was unbearable. The alternative required admitting something far more painful. That he had just walked away from the person he loved. Not because she treated him badly. Not because the relationship failed. Not because they weren't compatible. But because he allowed other people's definitions of success to influence his own. James sat alone long after Sophia left. Trying to convince himself he had protected his future. Trying to convince himself he had done the right thing. Trying to convince himself the pain would eventually fade. What he didn't know was that this decision would follow him for years. And while Sophia would spend the next decade building something extraordinary from heartbreak, James would eventually discover a truth that no amount of money could protect him from. Some mistakes don't hurt immediately. Sometimes the consequences arrive years later, and when they do, they force you to confront exactly who you chose to become. The weeks after the breakup passed in a blur. James buried himself in work. Not because he suddenly became more ambitious, because work was easier. Work gave him something to focus on. Numbers made sense. Business plans made sense. Growth strategies made sense. Relationships were far more complicated. Every morning he arrived at the office before most employees. Every evening he left long after many had gone home. His schedule became relentless. Meetings, presentations, travel, negotiations, expansion plans. The company was entering a critical stage. New opportunities appeared almost monthly. Markets that once seemed distant were suddenly within reach. Investors pushed for faster growth. Partners wanted larger commitments. Competitors were struggling to keep up. From the outside, everything looked impressive. Exactly the kind of success James had always worked toward. 1 year after the breakup, the company opened several new offices. The announcement generated attention throughout the industry. Business publications began mentioning James more frequently. Interviews followed. Recognition followed. Awards followed. Each accomplishment led directly to another. People congratulated him constantly. His phone rarely stopped ringing. Executives wanted meetings. Investors wanted partnerships. Organizations wanted him to speak at events. The company continued expanding. James continued delivering results. The momentum became difficult to ignore. By the third year, his company had become one of the fastest-growing technology businesses in the region. Industry leaders paid attention. Financial analysts discussed future projections. Articles praised his leadership. One morning, James entered a coffee shop before a meeting. A stranger recognized him immediately. "You're James, right?" James looked surprised. The man smiled. "I read your interview last month." James thanked him politely. The interaction lasted less than a minute. Still, it stayed with him. Not because he enjoyed attention, because it felt strange. Years earlier, nobody would have recognized him. Now complete strangers occasionally knew his name. Success was changing his life. Gradually, steadily, publicly. The company headquarters eventually moved into a larger space. The offices reflected the growth. Modern architecture, advanced technology, expansive meeting rooms. Everything designed to communicate achievement. Visitors often seemed impressed. Employees felt proud. James appreciated it. He genuinely did. After years of effort, the company had earned its success. No shortcuts, no luck, just relentless work. The rewards continued arriving. His income increased dramatically. Investments performed well. Opportunities multiplied. The apartment overlooking Manhattan became larger. The view became more impressive. The furniture became more expensive. The lifestyle became more luxurious. Private events replaced ordinary gatherings. Exclusive venues became normal. Travel upgraded from comfortable to exceptional. By most standards, James had everything he once wanted. The strange part was how quickly extraordinary things became ordinary. The first luxury apartment felt exciting. The second felt normal. The first major award felt unforgettable. The fifth felt expected. Achievements that once seemed life-changing eventually became routine. Success kept raising its own standards. One goal became another, then another, then another. The finish line never stayed still. Around the fourth year after the breakup, James attempted to move on romantically. At first, he genuinely believed he was ready. The relationship seemed promising. Conversations flowed easily. There was attraction. Compatibility appeared possible. For a while, everything looked fine. Then small problems emerged. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. The connection simply never deepened. Eventually, the relationship ended. James accepted it calmly. Sometimes, things didn't work out. Life moved on. Several months later, another relationship followed. Then another. Each one began with potential. Each one ended with disappointment. The pattern became difficult to ignore. People liked James. Many admired him. Some admired his success more than they admired him. That distinction became increasingly noticeable. One evening, he sat across from someone during dinner. The conversation kept returning to the same subjects: his company, his income, his future plans, his investments. By the end of the evening, he realized something uncomfortable. The person knew almost everything about his career, very little about him. The realization followed him home, not because it was shocking, because it felt familiar. Years passed. Relationships came and went. None lasted. None felt right. None felt like Sophia. James rarely admitted that comparison, even to himself. Yet it remained there, quietly, persistent. Unexpected reminders appeared everywhere. A song playing in a restaurant. A neighborhood event he happened to pass. A rainy evening. A coffee shop. Small moments, capable of reopening old memories. One Saturday afternoon, nearly 6 years after the breakup, James found himself walking through Brooklyn after a business meeting. The area looked familiar. Not immediately. Then it hit him. He had been there before, years ago, with Sophia. He stopped walking, just for a second. People continued moving around him. Traffic continued. Life continued. Yet memories arrived unexpectedly. Her laughter, the way she teased him, the way she could turn an ordinary day into something memorable. James shook his head and continued walking. Still, the memory remained. By year 7, his company expanded nationally. The growth exceeded even his own expectations. Revenue climbed. Recognition increased. Business magazines featured him prominently. Professional organizations invited him to speak. Young entrepreneurs viewed him as an example of success. From the outside, he appeared unstoppable. Inside, the experience felt more complicated. Success solved many problems. It did not solve loneliness. The distinction became harder to ignore with age. Business victories felt satisfying for a while. Then, another challenge replaced them. Another goal appeared. Another target demanded attention. The cycle never ended. One evening, after returning from a successful business trip, James entered his apartment. The city skyline stretched beyond the windows. The apartment was beautiful, quiet, perfectly maintained, and completely empty. He placed his suitcase near the door, removed his jacket, looked around. No one waited for him. No one asked about the trip. No one shared the moment. The silence felt heavier than usual. James walked toward the window. Below him, New York glowed beneath the night sky. Millions of people. Millions of stories. For reasons he couldn't explain, Sophia entered his thoughts again. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just naturally. The way certain memories return when enough time has passed. He wondered where she was, wondered whether she was happy, wondered whether she had found the future he failed to give her. The thoughts lingered longer than expected. Then he looked away. Work awaited in the morning. Another meeting, another opportunity, another milestone. His empire continued growing. The world continued calling him successful. Yet some nights, standing alone above the city he had conquered professionally, James couldn't escape a simple question. What if the most important thing he ever lost wasn't a business opportunity? What if it was Sophia? The morning after the breakup, Sophia woke up before her alarm. For several seconds, she stared at the ceiling, still, silent, hoping the previous evening had been a bad dream. Then reality returned. The conversation, the silence, the look on James's face. The moment she walked away, her chest tightened. For a few minutes, she allowed herself to feel it. The disappointment, the sadness, the confusion, not because she wanted to stay there, because pretending she was fine would not change anything. Eventually she sat up. Life was waiting. Rent still needed to be paid. Students still needed support. Responsibilities still existed. Heartbreak did not pause real life. That morning, Sophia moved through her routine more quietly than usual. She prepared breakfast, gathered her things, left for work. The city looked exactly the same, which somehow made everything feel stranger. How could the world continue normally when her own future had changed overnight? The answer was simple. Because the world always continues, whether people are ready or not. By the time she arrived at the community center, several students were already there. Some waved. Others greeted her warmly. Sophia smiled back. Not a forced smile, a tired one, but genuine. One student immediately noticed. "You okay?" Sophia laughed softly. "Why does everybody ask me that?" "Because you usually ask us first." The comment caught her off guard. Then she smiled. "I'll be fine." And for the first time that day, she realized she meant it. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. The weeks that followed weren't easy. There were moments when memories appeared unexpectedly. A restaurant, a song, a street corner, a familiar neighborhood. Certain reminders still hurt. Yet Sophia made a decision early. She would not allow one painful chapter to define the rest of her life. If she couldn't move forward immediately, she would move forward one day at a time, 1 week at a time, one small step at a time. The community center became her anchor. Helping others gave structure to difficult days. Purpose has a way of carrying people through seasons they never expected. Months passed, then more months. The pain gradually lost its sharpest edges, not because Sophia forgot, because healing was doing its work. Her focus increasingly shifted toward the students she mentored. Many faced challenges far greater than anything she experienced. Financial struggles, unstable housing, family difficulties, lack of opportunities. Yet despite those obstacles, she constantly encountered remarkable determination. Teenagers who worked harder than most adults. Students who dreamed big, despite difficult circumstances. Young people who simply needed someone to believe in them. One afternoon, Sophia sat with a student who had just received a college acceptance letter. The excitement lasted only a few minutes, then concern appeared. Sophia noticed immediately. "What happened?" The student hesitated, then answered quietly, "I don't know if I can afford it." The joy disappeared from the room. Sophia listened carefully. The student explained the situation. Tuition, housing, expenses, numbers that felt impossible. When the conversation ended, Sophia sat alone for a long time. The situation wasn't unique. She had heard similar stories before. Talented students, earning opportunities they couldn't fully access. Potential blocked by financial barriers. Dreams delayed by circumstances beyond their control. The pattern bothered her deeply. Not because she believed life was fair, because she knew how much talent was being wasted. Weeks later, another student faced a similar challenge. Then another. Then another. The stories varied. The obstacle remained the same. Money. Not a lack of ability. Not a lack of determination. Money. The realization stayed with Sophia. Day after day. Week after week. Until eventually, a question formed. What if something could be done? The idea arrived quietly. Not as a grand vision. Not as a perfect plan. Just a simple thought. What if students received more support? At first, Sophia dismissed the idea. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't famous. She wasn't connected to powerful donors. What exactly was she supposed to do? Still, the thought refused to disappear. Eventually, she decided to start small. Very small. A community event. Nothing complicated. Just an effort to raise modest financial support for a few students. The goal wasn't ambitious. The goal was possible. Sophia spent evenings planning, making calls, organizing details, finding people willing to help. The process required far more work than expected. Some days felt encouraging. Other days felt discouraging. Several people politely declined. Others promised support and disappeared. Progress happened slowly, painfully slowly. Yet Sophia continued. The event eventually happened. The turnout exceeded expectations. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to help. Enough to make a difference. Enough to prove something important. People cared. The realization energized her. For the first time, the idea felt real. Not easy. Real. After that first effort, Sophia continued. Another event followed. Then another. Each one taught valuable lessons. Each one expanded the network of people willing to contribute. The amounts weren't enormous. Nobody was writing massive checks. Ordinary people contributed what they could. Small donations. Small acts of generosity. Small opportunities, creating larger outcomes. Sophia worked tirelessly. Her schedule became demanding. Community center responsibilities filled her days. Fundraising efforts filled many evenings. Planning occupied weekends. Friends occasionally questioned her workload. Sophia laughed. I ask myself the same thing. Yet she kept going. Not because she enjoyed exhaustion, because she could see results. The first scholarship recipient changed everything. Seeing someone receive support transformed the mission from an idea into reality. Sophia still remembered the expression on that student's face. Relief, gratitude, hope, emotions impossible to forget. The experience reinforced her commitment. The work mattered deeply. Not every year brought success. Some efforts fell short. Some fundraising goals weren't reached. Some plans failed entirely. There were evenings when Sophia sat alone reviewing numbers that simply didn't work. Moments when frustration replaced optimism. Moments when quitting seemed reasonable. One particularly difficult year brought several setbacks at once. A planned fundraising event underperformed. Expected contributions never arrived. Expenses increased unexpectedly. The numbers looked discouraging. Sophia stared at the reports for a long time. The easiest option would have been reducing the program. The practical option would have been lowering expectations. Instead, she chose persistence. The next morning, she started again. Another phone call, another meeting, another conversation, another effort. One step forward, then another, then another. Progress returned gradually, as it often does. The most meaningful achievements rarely happen overnight. They grow through consistency, through patience, through refusing to quit when results arrive slower than hoped. Years continued passing. The scholarship effort slowly expanded. Not explosively, steadily. The best kind of growth. Each success created momentum. Each student helped strengthen the mission. Each positive outcome encouraged further support. Sophia remained deeply involved in every stage. She reviewed applications, attended events, mentored students, answered questions, celebrated achievements, supported people during setbacks. The mission became woven into her life, not as a project, as a purpose. Looking back, Sophia sometimes found it difficult to identify exactly when everything changed. There was no single breakthrough moment, no magical turning point. Just thousands of ordinary decisions made consistently over time. One student helped, then another, then another. A chain reaction of opportunity. The heartbreak that once felt overwhelming had gradually transformed into something else. Not bitterness, not regret, motivation. The experience taught Sophia something valuable. Pain can either close a person's heart or expand it. She chose the second path. Rather than focusing on what she lost, she focused on what she could give. That choice changed everything. By the end of the decade, Sophia would look back and barely recognize the woman who walked away from that final conversation with James. Not because she became someone different, because she became more fully herself. And without realizing it, the mission she built was preparing to impact far more lives than she ever imagined possible. What started as a simple effort to help a few students gradually became something much larger. Not overnight, not through luck, and certainly not through endless resources. The growth happened one life at a time, one opportunity at a time, one student at a time. Sophia never forgot that. Every year, applications continued increasing. More students heard about the scholarship program. More families reached out. More schools became aware of the support available. The demand often exceeded what the program could provide. That reality never became easier. Sophia still wished she could help everyone, yet she focused on what she could do instead of what she couldn't. That mindset kept the mission moving forward. Several years after launching the program, Sophia attended a small scholarship celebration. The room wasn't fancy. No cameras, no media attention. No important guests, just students and families gathering to recognize a new group of recipients. Those events became some of Sophia's favorite moments. Not because they were glamorous, because they reminded her why the work mattered. Near the end of the evening, one student approached her. The young woman looked nervous. Sophia smiled immediately. "What's wrong?" The student laughed. "Nothing." "Then why do you look terrified?" That earned a smile. The student hesitated before speaking. "I just wanted to say thank you." Sophia nodded. "You're welcome." The student shook her head. "No." Her eyes filled with emotion. "You don't understand." For a moment, she struggled to continue. Then she finally found the words. "My family thought college wasn't possible." Sophia listened quietly. The student smiled through tears. "You changed that." The room around them seemed to fade away. Sophia simply listened. Because sometimes people don't need advice. They need someone willing to hear their story. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. Yet it stayed with Sophia long afterward. Not because she wanted praise. Because it reminded her what opportunity could do. One chance. One open door. One person deciding to help. The effects could last for years. As time passed, those stories multiplied. Students graduated. Careers began. Dreams that once felt unreachable slowly became reality. Every success reinforced the mission. Every achievement created new possibilities. Sophia kept photographs from many of the scholarship events, not for recognition, for perspective. Whenever exhaustion appeared, she looked through them. Graduation photos, acceptance letters, celebration gatherings, moments that represented hope becoming reality. Those images reminded her that persistence mattered, especially during difficult seasons. One afternoon, nearly 7 years after the scholarship program began, Sophia attended another community event. While speaking with several families, she noticed a familiar face approaching. At first she couldn't place it. Then recognition appeared. The former scholarship recipient smiled. Sophia smiled too. "What are you doing here?" The answer surprised her. "I came to volunteer." Sophia blinked. "Volunteer?" The young man laughed. "Yeah." A moment passed. Then he added quietly, "Somebody helped me." Sophia felt her chest tighten, not from sadness, from pride, the best kind. The young man continued, "I figured I should help somebody else." That simple statement became one of Sophia's favorite memories, because it represented something larger than any single scholarship. The mission was beginning to reproduce itself. People who received support were returning to provide support. Hope was creating more hope. Opportunity was creating more opportunity. The cycle continued growing. Over the years, more former recipients returned. Some volunteered. Some mentored students. Some contributed financially. Others shared experiences and encouragement. The community strengthened itself. One generation lifting the next. Then the next, doing the same. The results became increasingly visible. Neighborhoods that once struggled to send students to college began celebrating growing numbers of graduates. Families that never imagined higher education became familiar with application processes. Young people who once doubted themselves began aiming higher. Not because every problem disappeared, because more opportunities existed than before. Sophia watched the transformation happen gradually, which made it even more meaningful. Real change rarely announces itself. Often it arrives quietly, visible only when enough time has passed to look back. The scholarship program eventually expanded beyond anything Sophia originally imagined. Partnerships formed. Community support increased. Resources improved. What began as a small effort to help a handful of students eventually reached hundreds, then more. The numbers mattered, but they never became Sophia's focus. Whenever people asked about growth, she usually redirected attention. Back to the students, back to the families, back to the mission itself. Recognition never interested her very much. Results did. Several people encouraged her to promote herself more aggressively, build a public profile, seek attention, increase visibility. Sophia usually laughed, then changed the subject. The work mattered more than the spotlight. That attitude earned respect. People trusted her because they sensed authenticity. Nothing felt performative. Nothing felt calculated. She wasn't building a brand. She was building opportunities. The distinction mattered, especially to the people she served. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, James's life continued moving in a very different direction. His company reached new heights. Revenue increased. Expansion continued. Recognition followed. Professionally, everything appeared stronger than ever. Personally, the picture looked different. The loneliness he occasionally noticed years earlier became harder to ignore. Not every day, not constantly, but often enough. Business dinners ended. He returned home alone. Major achievements happened. He celebrated briefly before moving to the next objective. Relationships appeared. Relationships ended. Nothing seemed to last. The contrast between public success and private fulfillment became increasingly noticeable. One evening, James attended a high-profile event. The room was filled with influential people. Conversations flowed. Laughter echoed through the venue. By every visible measure, the evening was successful. Yet while standing among hundreds of people, James experienced a familiar feeling. Distance. Not physical distance. Emotional distance. A realization that being surrounded by people wasn't the same thing as feeling connected to them. The feeling followed him home, as it often did. Back in Brooklyn, Sophia spent that same evening reviewing scholarship applications. The work wasn't exciting. The task wasn't glamorous, yet she felt fulfilled. Tired, but fulfilled. There was a difference. A meaningful difference. Years earlier, James and Sophia stood side by side, imagining a future together. Now their lives had traveled in opposite directions. Neither path was completely easy. Neither path was completely perfect. Yet the outcomes were becoming increasingly clear. James accumulated accomplishments. Sophia accumulated impact. The distinction would become impossible to ignore later. For now, life continued moving forward, one student at a time, one opportunity at a time, one changed future at a time. And before we continue, let me ask you something. What do you believe leaves the greatest legacy? Money? Fame? Power? Or the lives we help along the way? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Mr. George Stories. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us what truly matters. By the end of the decade, thousands of students would know Sophia's name, not because she sought recognition, because her actions reached them. And while she remained focused on helping others, an extraordinary moment was quietly approaching. A moment neither she nor James could have predicted. A moment that would bring their two worlds back together after 10 long years. The reunion was closer than either of them realized. The invitation arrived on a Monday morning. James almost ignored it. His assistant had already placed several event invitations on his schedule that month. Industry dinners, award ceremonies, fundraising events, networking receptions. After years of success, invitations appeared constantly. Most blended together. This one nearly did too, until he noticed a detail. The event would honor an anonymous donor whose educational initiatives had impacted thousands of students throughout New York. The phrase caught his attention, not because he expected anything unusual, because educational programs had become increasingly important to many organizations. The event had attracted major sponsors, business leaders, community organizations, political figures, philanthropists. The guest list alone generated interest. James accepted the invitation, then moved on with his day. At the time, he had no idea that decision would become one of the most important moments of his life. The week passed quickly. Meetings filled his calendar. Travel occupied several days. Business continued demanding his attention. By Friday evening, the gala finally arrived. New York glowed beneath the evening sky. Traffic moved steadily through Manhattan. Luxury vehicles lined portions of the street, near the event venue. Guests arrived in formal attire. Valets hurried from one vehicle to another. Photographers captured arrivals. Conversations filled the entrance area. The event occupied one of the city's most prestigious hotels. Inside, preparations had been underway for months. Every detail reflected careful planning. Large floral arrangements decorated the ballroom. Elegant table settings filled the room. Lighting highlighted the stage without overwhelming the atmosphere. Everything felt polished, intentional, professional. Staff members moved efficiently between final preparations. Volunteers reviewed seating arrangements. Event coordinators checked schedules one last time. The anticipation was impossible to miss. This wasn't simply another fundraiser. People genuinely wanted answers, because nobody knew the identity of the donor. For years, the mystery had generated curiosity. Stories circulated constantly. Theories appeared everywhere. Some believed the donor was a billionaire. Others suspected a celebrity. Several guests were convinced a major corporation secretly funded the program. Nobody seemed completely certain. That uncertainty only increased interest. James arrived shortly after 7 o'clock. The moment he entered the ballroom, he recognized several familiar faces. Executives, investors, industry leaders, people he had known professionally for years. Greetings followed. Handshakes followed. Brief conversations followed. The routine felt familiar, comfortable, predictable. At first, the evening unfolded exactly as expected. Guests circulated throughout the ballroom. Small groups formed and reformed. Servers moved through the crowd. Music played softly in the background. The atmosphere balanced sophistication with curiosity. One topic dominated nearly every conversation: the anonymous donor. James heard theories almost immediately. A man near one of the tables seemed confident. "I heard it's an entertainment executive." Someone else disagreed. "No chance." "Why not?" "Too much long-term involvement." Another guest joined the discussion. "My guess is private wealth." "What kind?" "Old money?" The debate continued. James listened quietly, not because he cared deeply, because the speculation was entertaining. Nobody possessed actual information, yet everyone sounded convinced. A woman standing nearby smiled. "Watch it be somebody nobody expects." Several people laughed. The comment seemed harmless. Nobody realized how accurate it would become. As the evening progressed, more guests arrived. The ballroom eventually filled. Conversations became louder. Energy increased. People moved toward assigned seating. Staff members prepared for the program to begin. James took his place at one of the sponsor tables. From his seat, he had a clear view of the stage. A large screen dominated the backdrop. Professional lighting framed the presentation area. Everything appeared ready. Still, anticipation continued building. Several guests checked the event program. Others discussed scholarship statistics. Many wondered how one person could have impacted so many lives while remaining largely unknown. That question fascinated people. In an age where recognition often followed generosity, anonymity felt unusual, especially at this scale. The mystery created intrigue. The impact created respect. Together, they created anticipation. The event host eventually stepped onto the stage. Applause followed immediately. The room gradually settled. Conversations faded. Attention shifted forward. The evening was officially beginning. The host welcomed everyone warmly. Sponsors were acknowledged. Organizations received recognition. Volunteers were thanked. The audience responded politely. James listened attentively. The presentation moved smoothly. Several speakers discussed educational opportunities throughout New York. Statistics highlighted challenges facing many students. Stories illustrated the importance of support systems. The audience remained engaged, yet everyone knew the central question still remained unanswered. Who was the donor? The host understood this perfectly. Each mention of the anonymous benefactor increased curiosity. Each reference intensified speculation. At one point, The host smiled knowingly. "I realize many of you are eager for answers." Laughter moved through the room. The host continued, "And I promise those answers are coming." More laughter. More anticipation. The audience appreciated the suspense. The mystery had become part of the experience itself. James glanced around the ballroom. Even seasoned executives appeared interested. Normally, these events followed predictable patterns. Tonight felt different. Something about the atmosphere stood out. Not dramatic, just unusually genuine. People weren't discussing investments. They weren't discussing acquisitions. They weren't discussing influence. They were discussing lives, possibilities, opportunities, students, families, communities. The focus felt refreshingly human. As the evening continued, video presentations highlighted the scholarship program's growth. Images appeared across the giant screen. Graduation ceremonies, campus visits, community events, celebrations, achievements. The audience responded warmly. James found himself paying closer attention than expected. The stories felt authentic. The impact felt real. There was no exaggeration, no performance, just evidence of meaningful work. The mystery surrounding the donor only deepened. Whoever this person was, they clearly cared about more than recognition. The realization earned James's respect. Many people donated. Far fewer remained committed for years without seeking attention. That level of dedication impressed him. Eventually, dinner concluded. Conversations returned briefly. Speculation intensified once again. One guest leaned toward James. "Any guesses?" James smiled. "Not anymore." The guest laughed. "That's not an answer. It's the best one I've got." Several people nearby joined the discussion. Every theory sounded plausible. Every theory sounded wrong. Nobody knew, and that uncertainty created exactly the atmosphere the organizers wanted. Excitement, curiosity, expectation. The host eventually returned to the stage. This time the energy inside the ballroom shifted noticeably. People straightened in their seats. Conversations ended immediately. The room sensed something important was approaching. The host smiled, then paused. The timing was deliberate, carefully calculated, perfect. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host began, "tonight, you will finally meet the person whose commitment has changed thousands of lives." A wave of excitement moved through the audience. Every eye focused forward. Every conversation stopped. Every distraction disappeared. The mystery that had lasted for years was about to end. James leaned back slightly in his chair, interested, curious, completely unaware that the next few minutes were about to bring the past crashing into the present. And when that moment arrived, nothing would feel the same again. The ballroom remained completely focused on the stage. The anticipation that had been building throughout the evening had reached its highest point. For years, people had wondered about the anonymous donor. Tonight, they would finally get their answer. The host stood at the center of the stage, allowing the silence to settle naturally. Nobody seemed impatient. In fact, the suspense only made the moment more powerful. The host smiled warmly. "Before we introduce the person we're honoring tonight, we'd like to share a few stories." The giant screen behind the stage came to life. A video began playing. At first, the room saw photographs, graduation ceremonies, families celebrating, students receiving acceptance letters, moments filled with joy, moments filled with relief, moments filled with possibility. Soft music accompanied the images. The audience watched attentively. Then the first student appeared on screen. The young woman sat inside what looked like a college library. She smiled nervously before speaking. "There was a time when I thought college wasn't meant for people like me." The ballroom became quiet. Her words carried weight. She explained how financial challenges nearly forced her to abandon her dreams, how uncertainty followed her every day, how she constantly worried about the future. Then her expression changed. Hope entered her voice. "Everything changed when somebody gave me a chance." The audience listened carefully. The students smiled. "I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for that opportunity." The screen faded to another story. This time a young man appeared. His voice carried confidence. The confidence of someone who had overcome difficult circumstances. He described growing up surrounded by obstacles. Moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. Moments when he doubted himself. Then he spoke about receiving support, receiving encouragement, receiving belief. The audience remained completely engaged. Several people nodded as they listened, because the story felt real, not rehearsed, not exaggerated, real. The video continued. One testimony became another, then another. Different backgrounds, different challenges, different journeys. Yet one theme connected all of them. Someone had believed in them when they needed it most. James found himself leaning forward slightly. The stories affected him more than expected, not because they were emotional, because they felt genuine. Years in business had taught him how to recognize authenticity. These students weren't performing, they were speaking from experience. The final testimonial ended. The ballroom responded with warm applause. The host returned to the stage. Those stories represent only a small fraction of the lives impacted by this mission. The audience applauded again. The host waited patiently before continuing. For nearly a decade, one individual has remained committed to helping students build brighter futures. The room grew quieter. Everyone knew what was coming. The reveal. Finally, the host smiled. "We believe it's time for you to meet her." Her. The word immediately captured attention. Several people exchanged surprised looks. Many of the earlier theories suddenly disappeared. The room became still. The host turned toward the giant screen. "Please join me in honoring the woman behind this extraordinary work." The screen faded to black. For one brief moment, the ballroom sat in complete silence. No conversations, no movement, no distractions, just expectation. Then a photograph appeared. James froze. Completely. His mind refused to process what he was seeing. The face on the screen looked familiar, impossible, yet unmistakable. Sophia. For a second he genuinely thought he was mistaken. His eyes remained locked on the screen. The photograph stayed there, smiling, confident, warm. Exactly the way he remembered her. Yet somehow different too. Not older, stronger. The realization hit him like a wave. Sophia, the woman he had not seen in 10 years. The woman he once imagined spending his life with. The woman he had walked away from. The woman he convinced himself he could forget. She was standing at the center of the mystery that had captured the attention of the entire city. The ballroom erupted. Applause exploded across the room. Guests immediately rose to their feet. Many smiled. Others cheered. The reaction was overwhelming. James remained seated. Not because he didn't want to stand, because his body seemed incapable of movement. His heart pounded. His thoughts collided with one another. 1,000 memories rushed back at once. The coffee shop, the broken umbrella, the laughter, the block parties, the family gatherings, the conversations about the future, the night everything ended. For years those memories existed quietly in the background of his life. Now they returned with full force. James barely heard the applause around him. The room seemed distant. His attention remained fixed on the screen. Sophia, of all the people in New York, of all the possibilities, of all the theories, how could it be Sophia? The answer appeared obvious almost immediately. Because this work reflected exactly who she had always been. Helping people, encouraging people, creating opportunities. Even 10 years earlier, those values had shaped everything she did. James felt a knot form in his chest. The realization was impossible to ignore. While he spent years building a company, Sophia had spent years building something entirely different, something measured in lives rather than profits. The applause continued. The audience clearly adored her. Not because she was famous, not because she sought attention, because she had earned their respect. The host smiled as the standing ovation continued. Finally, Sophia appeared from the side of the stage. The applause grew even louder. James looked up, and there she was. Not a photograph, not a memory. Not an old story. The real Sophia, standing only a short distance away. For the first time in 10 years, she walked toward the center of the stage calmly, comfortably. There was no arrogance, no desire to impress anyone. She simply looked grateful. The audience responded immediately. Many guests remained standing. Some wiped away tears. Others applauded even harder. The atmosphere felt emotional, earned, powerful. Sophia smiled modestly, then looked out across the crowd. For a brief moment, her eyes moved across the ballroom. James wondered whether she had noticed him. He couldn't tell, and suddenly, he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The host welcomed Sophia warmly. The applause continued once more. James finally stood with everyone else, not out of obligation, because remaining seated no longer felt possible. He joined the standing ovation, slowly, quietly, thoughtfully. As he applauded, another realization settled heavily inside him. 10 years earlier, he allowed other people's opinions to influence the most important decision of his life. 10 years later, those same types of people were standing in admiration of Sophia. The irony felt impossible to ignore. James looked around the room. Executives, investors, public figures, influential leaders, all applauding, all respecting, all celebrating the woman he once believed didn't fit into his world. The realization stung, because deep down, he knew something painful. The room wasn't honoring Sophia because she became wealthy. They weren't honoring her because she gained status. They were honoring her because she spent 10 years changing lives. The distinction mattered more than ever. The applause eventually softened. Guests returned to their seats. Excitement remained visible everywhere. Conversations whispered through the ballroom. People smiled. People reflected. People looked at Sophia with admiration. James sat quietly, still trying to absorb everything. The evening had already exceeded every expectation. Yet it wasn't finished. Not even close. Because the most powerful stories had not been told yet. And before the night ended, James would hear truths that forced him to reevaluate everything he thought he understood about success. Everything he thought he understood about value. Everything he thought he understood about the choices he made 10 years earlier. The reveal was over. The real impact was only beginning. Chapter 4. Part 3. The moment of truth. The applause gradually settled. The excitement remained. Yet, the atmosphere inside the ballroom had changed. The mystery was gone. The questions had been answered. Everyone now knew the identity of the anonymous donor. Sophia. For many guests, the revelation felt inspiring. For James, it felt personal, deeply personal. He sat quietly as the evening continued. His attention never drifted. Not once. The business conversations that usually occupied his thoughts seemed unimportant now. The emails waiting on his phone could wait. The meetings scheduled for the following week could wait. For the first time in a long while, nothing outside that ballroom felt urgent. The host returned to the stage. A warm smile crossed her face. Tonight is not only about honoring one person. She paused. It's also about honoring the lives that have been transformed. The audience responded with applause. The host nodded. We would like to share a few more stories. The giant screen illuminated once again. Several photographs appeared. Students, families, graduations, moments of achievement, moments of joy, moments that represented years of hard work. The first speaker approached the microphone. A young woman, confident, professional, yet visibly emotional. She stood still for a moment before speaking. When people see me today, they see a successful attorney. The audience listened carefully. They see someone with a career. She smiled. They see someone who seems like she had everything figured out. A few people laughed softly. The young woman shook her head. The truth was very different. Her voice became more serious. There was a time when I thought my future had already been decided. The ballroom remained silent. She explained how financial hardship nearly forced her to abandon higher education, how fear constantly followed her, how uncertainty affected every decision. Then she spoke about receiving support. Support that changed everything. The audience watched closely. The emotion in her voice felt impossible to ignore. I didn't receive a miracle, she smiled. I received an opportunity. The statement landed beautifully. Simple, honest, powerful. The audience applauded warmly. James found himself reflecting on those words. Opportunity. Such a simple concept, yet one capable of changing an entire life. The speaker continued. When somebody believes in you during your lowest moments, it changes how you see yourself. The room became quiet once again. She smiled toward Sophia. That's exactly what happened to me. The applause returned. Sophia remained seated near the stage. Her expression reflected humility rather than pride. She seemed more interested in the stories than in the recognition. James noticed. The detail stayed with him. The next testimonial followed. Then another. Each story felt different, yet they shared common themes: support, encouragement, opportunity, hope. One speaker described becoming the first college graduate in their family. Another discussed overcoming homelessness. Another explained how mentorship helped them regain confidence after years of self-doubt. The stories continued, each one adding another layer to the picture, each one revealing more clearly what Sophia had spent 10 years building. This wasn't simply a scholarship program. It was a network of opportunities, a chain reaction of positive outcomes, a legacy measured through people. James listened carefully. The realization grew stronger with every story. Success looked different than he once believed. For years, he had measured achievement through numbers: revenue growth, market expansion, recognition, performance, objectives, targets, milestones. The measurements made sense in business, but sitting inside that ballroom, listening to people describe transformed lives, he began questioning whether those measurements told the entire story. One speaker approached the microphone carrying visible emotion. The young man took a moment before speaking. The room waited patiently. Finally, he began. My life almost went in a very different direction. His voice remained steady, but the audience could hear the weight behind the words. He explained how difficult circumstances nearly pushed him toward giving up. Not because he lacked ability, because he lacked hope. The distinction mattered. James listened closely. The speaker continued. I spent years believing nobody expected anything from me. The ballroom remained silent. Then he smiled. Until somebody did. The audience immediately understood who he meant. The young man looked toward Sophia. For a brief second, his voice weakened. He gathered himself and continued. When someone believes in you before you've accomplished anything, it changes everything. Several guests wiped away tears. Others nodded quietly. The emotional impact was undeniable. The young man eventually finished speaking. The standing ovation arrived almost immediately. People rose from their seats, applauding, celebrating, reflecting. James stood too, not because everyone else did, because the moment deserved it. As applause filled the ballroom, he looked toward Sophia again. She seemed uncomfortable with attention, not embarrassed, just humble. The spotlight clearly wasn't what motivated her. That realization mattered. Many people enjoy recognition. Sophia seemed focused on outcomes. The difference became increasingly clear. The host eventually returned to the stage. She looked across the audience, then toward Sophia. For 10 years, this mission has created opportunities for thousands of students. Applause followed. The host continued. Thousands of families have benefited. More applause. Thousands of futures have changed. The audience responded enthusiastically. James looked around the room. The evidence surrounded him. Not statistics. People. Actual people. Graduates. Professionals. Families. Lives moving in better directions because somebody cared enough to help. A realization settled heavily inside him. He thought about his company, the growth, the expansion, the success. He felt proud of those accomplishments. He should. They represented years of effort, years of sacrifice, years of discipline. Yet sitting in that ballroom, he noticed something. Nobody speaking that evening discussed numbers. Nobody celebrated financial performance. Nobody talked about market share. They talked about people, lives, opportunities. The difference struck him more deeply than expected. James suddenly remembered a conversation from years ago. A restaurant, a city view. Sophia talking about success. He could hear her voice clearly. Success is more about impact. At the time, he appreciated the comment. Now he finally understood it. Not intellectually, emotionally. The understanding arrived all at once, like pieces of a puzzle finally connecting. For years, he had been chasing bigger achievements, larger goals, greater recognition. There was nothing wrong with ambition, nothing wrong with success. Yet somewhere along the way, he had begun treating success as the destination itself. Sophia never made that mistake. She treated success as a tool, a way to help others, a way to create opportunities, a way to improve lives. The distinction changed everything. James lowered his eyes briefly. The realization felt painful, not because he regretted building his company, because he regretted the choice he made 10 years earlier. A choice rooted in fear, a choice rooted in appearances, a choice rooted in priorities that suddenly felt very small. The audience applauded once more as another video played. Images filled the giant screen. Graduation ceremonies, scholarship recipients, families embracing, students celebrating achievements. Years of impact compressed into a few minutes. The room watched in silence. James watched too. Every image reinforced the same truth. Sophia had spent 10 years building something extraordinary. Not for recognition, not for status, because she genuinely cared. The final image appeared, a collage of faces, hundreds of students, hundreds of stories, hundreds of opportunities. The audience immediately rose again. A powerful standing ovation filled the ballroom, longer than before, stronger than before. Many guests remained standing. Some applauded through tears. Others simply smiled. The atmosphere felt emotional in the best possible way. James stood among them, applauding, reflecting, confronting truths he had avoided for years. For the first time in a very long time, he stopped evaluating success through the lens he had always used. The room had shown him something different, something larger. A life could be successful because it generated wealth. A life could also be successful because it generated hope. Sophia had spent 10 years proving that. And as the applause continued around him, James finally understood why the room respected her so deeply. It wasn't because of what she owned. It wasn't because of what she earned. It wasn't because of what she achieved for herself. It was because of what she achieved for others. That realization changed something inside him, permanently. The evening had begun as a charity gala. It had become something else entirely. A mirror, one that forced James to examine his past, his choices, his values, his definition of success. And for the first time in 10 years, he knew exactly what he needed to do next. He needed to speak with Sophia, not to change the past, not to rewrite history, not to ask for another chance, simply to say the words he should have said long ago. Because some apologies become more necessary with time, not less. And after carrying the weight of his decision for an entire decade, James finally understood that the conversation waiting ahead could no longer be avoided. The applause eventually faded. Guests slowly returned to conversations. People gathered around tables. Some discussed the speeches. Others reflected on the stories they had heard. The energy inside the ballroom remained warm, emotional, meaningful. For James, however, everything seemed distant. The only thing he could focus on was Sophia. 10 years. 10 years had passed since their last conversation. 10 years since the night he watched her walk away. 10 years since he convinced himself he had made the right decision. Now she stood only a short distance away, speaking with guests, accepting congratulations, thanking people who approached her. The sight felt surreal. James remained where he was for several moments, not because he didn't want to move, because he wasn't entirely sure what to say. How do you begin a conversation that is 10 years overdue? How do you approach someone after carrying that much history? Several possibilities entered his mind. None felt right. Eventually he took a slow breath, then started walking. Every step felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, emotionally. The closer he moved toward her, the more memories returned. The coffee shop, the block parties, the family gatherings, the plans they once shared, the night he ended everything. Sophia was speaking with a small group of guests when she noticed him. Her eyes found his immediately. For a brief moment, neither moved. The noise around them seemed to disappear. Not completely, just enough. Enough for the moment to feel real. Sophia looked surprised, not shocked, not angry, simply surprised. James stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure of himself. The confident executive who could negotiate major business deals without hesitation now struggled to find a single sentence. Sophia offered a small smile. James, hearing his name in her voice after 10 years, felt strange, familiar, and strange. "Hi, Sophia." The words sounded inadequate, yet they were all he had. For a second, neither spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, just awkward. The kind that naturally appears when years of history stand between two people. Sophia saved them both. "It's been a long time." James laughed softly. "That's one way to put it." A small smile appeared. The tension eased slightly. Not gone, just lighter. Several nearby guests eventually moved away, giving them privacy. Neither seemed eager to rush the conversation. The moment deserved patience. Sophia glanced around the ballroom. "You look good." James smiled. "So do you." The answer felt simple, honest. Neither was trying to impress the other. The years had removed that need. Sophia folded her hands comfortably. "I honestly didn't expect to see you here." James nodded. "Neither did I." That answer earned a quiet laugh. For the first time, the conversation felt natural. Not easy. Natural. There was a difference. James looked toward the stage, then back at Sophia. "Congratulations." The sincerity in his voice was obvious. "You've built something incredible." Sophia's expression softened. "Thank you." She glanced around the room. "It still feels a little unreal." "I can imagine." Sophia laughed. "Actually, I can't." The honesty made James smile. That part of her hadn't changed. The ability to speak openly, comfortably, without performance, without pretending. For a few moments, they talked about the gala, the students, the evening itself, safe subjects, familiar territory. Both seemed to understand that deeper conversations would arrive eventually. There was no need to force them immediately. One of the things James noticed was how comfortable Sophia seemed. Not nervous, not defensive, not guarded. Simply comfortable. Years earlier he might have expected resentment, maybe anger, maybe distance. Instead he found something entirely different. Peace. The realization surprised him. Sophia eventually looked around the ballroom. "It's funny." "What is?" She smiled. "I spent months worrying nobody would show up." James laughed. "You had hundreds of people here." "I know." She shook her head. "Still worried. Some things never change." The comment made both of them laugh. The laughter felt genuine. For a moment the years between them seemed smaller. Not erased. Smaller. A comfortable pause followed. James studied her briefly, noticing details. The confidence, the calmness, the quiet certainty she carried. Sophia seemed fully settled into her life, fully comfortable with who she had become. The observation filled him with admiration and regret. Not regret for seeing her again. Regret for everything he missed. Sophia noticed his expression. "What?" James hesitated, then answered honestly. "I'm happy for you." The words carried more meaning than the sentence itself. Sophia understood immediately. She smiled gently. "Thank you." Another pause. This one felt more thoughtful, less awkward, more reflective. The years seemed present now, not standing between them, simply existing, acknowledged, accepted. Sophia eventually looked toward one of the large windows overlooking the city. The lights of New York stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Beautiful, busy, alive. A city that had witnessed both the beginning and ending of their relationship. James followed her gaze. Still love this city? Sophia smiled. Most days. Most days? It tests your patience sometimes. James laughed. That's fair. The conversation flowed more naturally now, like two people reconnecting, rather than two former partners confronting the past. The difference mattered. Neither seemed interested in reopening old wounds. Neither seemed interested in blame. Time had changed them. Growth had changed them. Life had changed them. Sophia looked back at him. And you? What about me? Do you still work too much? James immediately laughed. Some questions never lost their accuracy. Probably. Probably? Definitely. That earned another laugh. The familiarity surprised both of them. Not because the past disappeared, because genuine connection rarely disappears completely. Even after years, even after heartbreak, for several moments, they simply stood there. Two people who once imagined a future together. Two people whose lives traveled in completely different directions. Two people meeting again under circumstances neither could have predicted. The awkwardness that existed at the beginning of the conversation had mostly disappeared. Respect remained, warmth remained, history remained, yet something else had appeared as well. Understanding, the kind that only comes with time. Eventually the conversation slowed, not because it was ending, because both sensed they were approaching the topic that truly mattered. The topic that had waited 10 years. The topic neither could avoid forever. James looked at Sophia. Sophia looked back at him. The ballroom continued moving around them. Conversations continued. Music continued. Life continued. Yet for both of them, the next few minutes would matter more than anything else that happened that evening. Because after 10 years of silence, honesty was finally about to arrive. The conversation slowed naturally. Neither James nor Sophia seemed interested in filling the silence with small talk anymore. The easy moments had helped. They had removed some of the awkwardness. They had reminded both of them that despite everything that happened, they were still two people capable of speaking honestly. Now came the difficult part, the part that had waited 10 years. James looked toward the ballroom for a moment. Guests continued talking. Servers moved between tables. Laughter occasionally drifted through the room. The evening carried on, yet none of it held his attention. His focus remained entirely on Sophia. She noticed the shift immediately. The seriousness in his expression, the weight behind it. For a moment she simply waited, not impatiently, not nervously, patiently, giving him space to say whatever he needed to say. James finally exhaled. Slowly. There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time. Sophia didn't interrupt. She simply listened, the same way she had listened to students, the same way she had listened to families, the same way she had always listened when something mattered. James looked down briefly, then back at her. I'm sorry. The words came out quietly, not dramatic, not rehearsed, just honest. Sophia remained silent, not because she was ignoring him, because she understood those two words carried far more weight than they usually did. James continued. I should have said it years ago. A painful smile crossed his face. The truth is, I should have said it the night everything ended. Sophia's expression softened slightly. Still, she said nothing. James appreciated that. She wasn't rushing him, wasn't rescuing him from discomfort. She was allowing him to carry the responsibility himself, something he deserved. For several seconds he struggled to find the right words, not because he didn't know what he wanted to say, because there was no perfect way to say it, no elegant explanation, no excuse, only truth. And truth is rarely comfortable. I spent a long time convincing myself I made the right decision. Sophia looked at him carefully. The sentence felt important. James nodded slowly. I told myself it was practical. His voice carried frustration, not toward Sophia, toward himself. I told myself I was protecting my future. He laughed softly, a humorless laugh. The strange thing is, the more successful I became, the less convincing that explanation sounded. The honesty hung between them. Sophia remained calm, thoughtful, present. James continued. I kept telling myself I was moving forward. He looked around the ballroom briefly. Then tonight happened. Sophia followed his gaze. The stage, the students, the photographs, the stories, the evening, everything that had led them here. James shook his head. I realized something tonight. Sophia waited. James smiled sadly. I wasn't protecting my future. The sentence lingered long enough. Then he finished it. I was protecting my comfort. For the first time, emotion became visible in his eyes. Not overwhelming emotion, controlled emotion, the kind people carry for years, the kind that never completely disappears. Sophia listened carefully. No interruption, no judgment, no attempt to rescue him from accountability. James appreciated that more than she realized, because accountability only matters when it is fully owned. I let other people's opinions affect me. The words came slowly, deliberately. I cared too much about what people expected. His eyes lowered briefly, and not enough about what mattered. The ballroom around them seemed distant now. The conversation had become intensely personal, not romantic, human. Sophia folded her arms gently, not defensively, comfortably, allowing him to continue. James looked directly at her. A rare thing, because for years, even in private moments, he struggled to fully confront the memory. Now he forced himself to. You deserved better than the way I handled things. The sentence landed heavily. Sophia blinked, slowly, not because she disagreed, because hearing those words, after so many years, felt unexpected. James continued. You deserved honesty much earlier. A pause. You deserved courage. Another pause. And I didn't give you that. The admission cost him something. That much was obvious. Not because speaking was difficult, because he could no longer hide from the truth. The truth was standing directly in front of him. Sophia, the living reminder of the decision he made. For several moments, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt necessary. Some conversations require room to breathe. Eventually, Sophia smiled gently. Not a large smile, a thoughtful one. You've spent a lot of time thinking about this. James laughed softly. More than I'd like to admit. That answer felt real. Sophia believed him because she could hear it, not in the words, in the weight behind them. Years of reflection, years of reconsideration, years of wondering. The apology wasn't arriving because of the gala. The gala simply gave it a place to land. The apology had been forming for a long time. Sophia looked toward the city lights visible through the windows. For a moment she seemed lost in thought. Then she spoke. You know what's strange? James waited. The older I got, the less angry I became. The answer surprised him. Sophia smiled. When everything first happened, I was hurt. Her honesty matched his. Very hurt. James nodded slowly. He expected that. What came next surprised him. But anger takes a lot of energy. She laughed softly. And I had too much work to do. James found himself smiling. That sounded exactly like Sophia, years earlier. And now? Sophia continued. The students needed me. The sentence was simple, yet it explained everything. The mission needed me. She shrugged lightly. Life kept moving. James listened carefully. There was no bitterness in her voice, no hidden resentment, no desire to make him suffer. Just truth, a mature truth, one earned through experience. I didn't spend 10 years waiting for an apology. She smiled kindly. I spent 10 years building a life. The statement hit James harder than criticism would have. Because it reflected growth. Real growth. Sophia wasn't trapped in the past. She had moved forward. Not by forgetting. By living. The realization filled him with admiration and relief. Sophia looked back at him. For what it's worth. James waited. I appreciate you saying it. The words were simple, yet they mattered. A lot. James exhaled slowly. A tension he had carried for years seemed to ease slightly, not disappear. Ease. The difference mattered, because apologies don't erase consequences. They acknowledge them, and sometimes that's enough. Sophia studied him for a moment, then smiled. You look lighter. James laughed. Do I? A little. He shook his head. That's probably because I finally said it. Sophia nodded. Probably. Both smiled. The conversation felt different now, not because the past vanished, because the truth had finally been spoken. The weight no longer needed to hide. The years no longer needed to sit silently between them. Everything had been acknowledged. Everything had been named. And something unexpected began to appear. Peace. Not dramatic peace. Not cinematic peace. Real peace. The kind that arrives when unfinished conversations finally reach completion. James looked around the ballroom again. The students. The families. The people whose lives had been changed. Then back at Sophia. I mean this. Sophia waited. I'm proud of you. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. You built something remarkable. For a second, Sophia looked away, not embarrassed, just reflective. Then she smiled. Thank you. A small silence followed. Comfortable now. The kind shared by two people who no longer needed to defend themselves, no longer needed to prove anything, no longer needed to win. Years earlier, one conversation had broken them apart. Tonight, another conversation was helping them heal. Not as a couple, not as people trying to rewrite history. As two human beings finally speaking honestly. The healing wasn't dramatic. It was better than that. It was genuine. And as both stood there beneath the lights of the gala, surrounded by evidence of 10 years of growth, they each understood something important. The past could not be changed. But understanding, it could still set something free. For James, that freedom came through accountability. For Sophia, it came through forgiveness. And together those two things created a moment neither of them would ever forget. Because sometimes, the most powerful healing doesn't happen when people get a second chance. Sometimes it happens when they finally tell the truth. For a while, neither James nor Sophia spoke. Not because there was tension, because some conversations leave people thoughtful. The apology had finally been spoken. The truth had finally been acknowledged. The weight of 10 silent years no longer sat between them. Around them, the gala continued. Guests laughed. Conversations flowed. The evening remained alive, with celebration. Yet, for James and Sophia, everything felt quieter, more personal, more reflective. Sophia walked toward one of the large windows overlooking Manhattan. James joined her. Beyond the glass, New York stretched endlessly into the distance. Buildings glowed against the night sky. Traffic moved below. Millions of people continued living their lives. The city looked exactly as it always had. Yet somehow, it felt different. At least to James. For several moments, they simply stood there, looking outward, thinking inward. Eventually, James broke the silence. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently? Sophia smiled softly. The question wasn't surprising. In many ways, it felt inevitable. She considered it carefully before answering. Not very often. James looked at her. Really? Sophia nodded. Not because I never thought about it. She paused. Because eventually I realized something. James waited. Sophia folded her arms comfortably and looked out at the city. We spend a lot of time imagining different versions of our lives. A small smile appeared. But life only gives us one version to live. The answer settled quietly between them. James nodded. Part of him understood exactly what she meant. Sophia wasn't avoiding the question. She simply wasn't trapped inside it. That distinction mattered. James looked down briefly, then laughed. That sounds like something you would say. Sophia smiled. And that sounds like something you would say. Both laughed. The moment felt warm, familiar. The kind of moment that reminded them why they had once connected so deeply. Yet neither confused warmth with regret. Neither confused comfort with longing. They had reached a different place now. A healthier place. A place built on understanding rather than unfinished emotions. The city lights reflected across the glass. Sophia studied them quietly. Then James asked the question that had been lingering in his mind all evening. Can I ask you something? Of course. When everything happened, he hesitated. Sophia turned toward him. James continued. When we separated, how did you keep going? The question carried genuine curiosity, not guilt, not self-punishment. Curiosity. Sophia thought about it. The answer didn't arrive immediately. Because the truth was more complicated than a simple sentence. Finally she smiled. I don't think I had a choice. James listened. Sophia continued. The students still needed help. She looked toward the ballroom. The community center still opened every morning. A pause. Life kept showing up. James nodded slowly. Sophia laughed softly. Honestly, some days I didn't feel strong. The honesty caught his attention. She continued. People always assume growth looks dramatic. A small shake of her head. It usually doesn't. James listened carefully. What does it look like? Sophia smiled. It looks like getting out of bed when you'd rather stay there. The answer felt real. It looks like showing up. Another pause. It looks like doing the next right thing even when you're hurt. James lowered his eyes briefly. The simplicity of the answer made it powerful, because it wasn't motivational. It wasn't polished. It was true. The kind of truth only experience can teach. Several seconds passed. Then James smiled. You know, I spent years thinking success would finally make everything make sense. Sophia looked at him. And? James laughed quietly. It turns out success creates new questions. Sophia nodded. That's usually how life works. James smiled. For a moment, both looked back toward the ballroom. Students, families, supporters, people celebrating, people connecting, people whose lives had intersected because one woman decided to help. The sight carried a different meaning now. James wasn't seeing a charity event. He was seeing evidence. Evidence that one person's choices matter. Evidence that impact travels further than anyone expects. Evidence that legacy often begins in small moments. The realization felt overwhelming. Not emotionally overwhelming. Meaningfully overwhelming. James looked at Sophia, then finally asked the question that had quietly followed him throughout the evening. Do you think everything happened the way it was supposed to? Sophia smiled. The answer came more quickly this time. I think we became who we needed to become. James considered that. The sentence felt important. Sophia continued. You were trying to build something. James nodded. She smiled. So was I. For a second, neither spoke. Then Sophia looked directly at him. The city lights reflected softly behind her. The ballroom buzzed in the distance. The moment felt strangely timeless. And then she said the words that would stay with James forever. You were chasing success. A brief pause. I was chasing purpose. The sentence landed with extraordinary clarity, not because it was dramatic, because it was true. Sophia continued. I think that's why our paths had to separate. James felt something shift inside him. Not pain. Understanding. The kind that arrives when someone finally gives language to a truth you've been struggling to explain. For years, he had viewed their story through the lens of one painful decision. Now he could see something larger. Two people moving toward different lessons, different journeys, different definitions of fulfillment. Neither path had been easy, yet both paths had shaped them. Sophia smiled gently. And maybe that's okay. James looked out across the city again. This time, he saw it differently. 10 years earlier, he would have looked at Manhattan and thought about achievement, growth, recognition, opportunity. Now his attention drifted elsewhere. The neighborhoods, the schools, the communities, the people, the lives hidden behind millions of windows. Success suddenly felt larger than personal accomplishment. Success could be measured through impact, through contribution, through service. The realization changed the way he viewed everything around him. Not because money stopped mattering, because it stopped being the only thing that mattered. For years, James believed wealth represented the highest form of success. Tonight had challenged that belief, not through criticism, through evidence. The students, the stories, the gratitude, the lives transformed. None of those things could be measured on a balance sheet, yet they carried enormous value. Perhaps greater value. James smiled, a genuine smile, one free of defensiveness, one free of regret, one rooted in understanding. You know something? Sophia looked at him. What? James laughed softly. I think this is the first time I've truly understood what you were trying to tell me all those years ago. Sophia smiled. Better late than never. Both laughed. The familiar humor felt comforting. The years between them seemed smaller now, not because the past disappeared, because it finally made sense. The evening was beginning to wind down. Guests slowly prepared to leave. Conversations softened. The celebration moved toward its natural conclusion. James looked around one final time, then back at Sophia. He felt grateful. Not because life had unfolded exactly the way he wanted, because life had taught him something valuable, a lesson he might never have learned otherwise. Success can build a comfortable life. Purpose can build a meaningful one. The most fortunate people eventually learn how to pursue both. For a moment, neither spoke. The city continued shining beyond the glass. The future remained unwritten, and the past finally felt complete. 10 years earlier, James believed Sophia was too poor to become his wife. Tonight, he understood something remarkable. Sophia had become one of the richest people he had ever known. Not because of money, not because of status, not because of recognition, because of impact, because of gratitude, because of the lives that were better because she existed. And for the first time in his life, James fully understood the difference. That understanding became the greatest gift the evening could have given him, and perhaps the greatest lesson of all. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. What do you think defines true success? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Mr. George Stories for more powerful stories filled with life lessons, inspiration, and unforgettable moments. Because sometimes, the most valuable things in life aren't the things we earn, they're the lives we touch along the way.